Today I'm with Daniel Miessler, a polymath in security, artificial intelligence, the human condition, and more. Daniel is a big thinker and has a popular blog, podcast, and newsletter called Unsupervised Learning, where he discusses a lot of the topics we go into today. We talk about AGI, the future of work, how things can and are likely to go terribly wrong, how humans will need to adapt, and so much more. This was a tricky one to navigate because it could have been easy to spend too much time on security and not enough time on artificial intelligence, but I think we managed to strike a useful balance, and I hope that you'll agree. With that, please enjoy this deep conversation with Daniel Miessler. Hello and welcome to the RSnake Show. Today I have with me Daniel Miessler. How are you, sir?
I'm good, thank you.
Yeah, good to have you. You drove up from Houston, am I right?
No, I flew in from California.
What?
Yeah.
I thought you lived in Houston.
No, I live in the Bay Area.
How did I get that wrong? I've been getting that wrong a lot lately.
I think we talked about I was going to think about driving up while I was hanging out in Houston.
Oh, that's smart. That's okay. All right. I'm like, where did I get Houston? Well, that makes much more sense. Well, thank you for flying all the way out here.
Absolutely.
It's a real pleasure. So we probably could talk about 100 things. And so I think I could talk about security, and I think we would have a great conversation. If we want to do pure play just about security and you're an expert, it would be very easy to go as deep or as wide as we felt like about security, I feel like. But I also think you know a lot about AI and ML, and it would be interesting to try to keep that as our primary focus as we're talking. And then as we dovetail around, we can hit on security issues. But
Sure.
I think it would be fun just to kind of try to keep it kind of narrow because I think it, just like you and me, we're having the same thoughts at the same time. This is super interesting. All the stuff that's happening is very, very interesting. And interesting in security ways, in AI ways, in geopolitics and socioeconomics and all kinds of things, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. So tell me, when you saw ChatGPT, like what crossed your mind? How did you take that? What was your thinking?
I had a few surreal moments where I was just like, this is going to change everything. And I've heard about and read about people having those moments, but I don't think I've ever really had one. Can't remember if I have. But I definitely had it then. Because I just felt instantly way more powerful. I felt like I had a second brain. I felt like I could leverage the wisdom of all of humanity, is what I thought.
And you couldn't have done that with the internet? I mean, you're pretty good at Googling, right? You could have searched the same kinds of things that it searched.
No, because this is better at harvesting what I want from a question. So if the quality of my question goes up in Google, I don't get a linear improvement in the answers. Whereas I feel like I do get that with GPT.
I've definitely noticed it really depends on the query. So for instance, if you know there's weird edge cases, because in our world, we're largely living in the edge. We're in the very razor edge of where technology exists.
Yep.
And it does not deal well with the edges. But Google also does terrible with the edges. If I ask it some very detailed questions, it's going to send me to the same Stack Overflow like 500 different ways, but it's the same bad data that's not helpful.
Well, and so do experts.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at the AI experts who've been studying this for 30 years, 40 years, they're all over the map in terms of their predictions of when this was going to come, their predictions of where it's going to go. So I feel like an expert, even in the security space, you can ask 5 different experts something about security, and they're going to give you different answers.
Specifically about prediction, but what about something very narrow? Like, I'll give you an example. I was asking it some very specific questions about how very large integers are handled on certain processors, and it was giving me some bad examples and bad code that would definitely break in production.
Yeah.
This is a weird edge case of technology that most normal experts would not have to deal with. But if I explained it to you, if I sat here and explained it to you, you would give me the right answer. I mean, you may not know the answer, but you'd go back and you could do the research and you'd eventually arrive with the correct answer. Whereas ChatGPT would never, ever, ever come up with the right answer.
Yeah, I was told very early on, I think November, don't trust it for math. Don't even ask it math questions because the bad thing about it, as everyone's talked about, it looks convincing when it's doing something really stupid. So I just don't really go towards it for math things. I don't ask it math things, even arithmetic.
Yeah. Specifically ChatGPT 3 and 3.5, especially bad at understanding overlapping information. So if Bob and Sue are available between these times and Jim and Joe are between these times, and whatever, you have like several different groups that are different times, like what is the right optimal time to have a meeting or whatever.
Sure.
It's terrible at that question. Like really, really bad. But it's not that it's so, but other things. I'll say one of the things that I was actually impressed by, and this is a stupid thing to be impressed by, but yet I was talking with a friend of mine on a big group chat, and this is probably 50 people on this thing. And we're all basically friends. We all know each other. And the guy who runs this thing, I said, I want an epic rap battle between, the famous hacker RSnake and the famous marketing expert, this guy named Marcus. And it wrote a 4-stanza rap battle between us going back and forth, where at the end we decided we were going to become friends and be rap battle friends together at the end. Like it was like a nice moral at the end of it, like a PG rated version of a rap battle. And I mean, it was off-putting and interesting, and I could not have done better.
Sure.
I don't think I could have done better.
Yeah, I found that stuff really impressive. The way I try to capture that is that it understands the je ne sais quoi of a thing. So when you say, is something Faustian or is something Machiavellian, it's obviously read the book, but it's also read thousands or hundreds of thousands of essays and stories about things that were about that thing. So in my model, like, it is truly understanding a thing because it's capturing all those data points. And the way I gauge whether or not it actually has true understanding is, can it apply that to a new situation? So I gave it like a serious test. So write a Faustian story with a Socratic, there's a woman who is Machiavellian who has a Socratic daughter, and it is a hero's journey story, but it ends like Ted Lasso. And so if you think about how many things have to be, encapsulated there. And then I also gave it some random thing in the story. I said that the plot of the story had to be about a shibboleth, which is like, where Icelandic people can say a word a certain way. And so at the guard gate, they ask somebody to say that word. And if they're not part of that village or whatever, they can't say it, they get shot. So that was the plot point for this thing. And it perfectly executed the story. It wove all those pieces in. And you think about how much human knowledge has to be captured in to be able to write that story. And that to me illustrates like how deeply it actually understands core concepts.
You hear that, Chris? All these writers are out of a job.
Yeah, I don't think so. I disagree. I put my name in ChatGPT and it made me the lead drummer for Motley Crue. So I have my own
issues. Is that an upgrade or a downgrade?
I would say just go with it, Chris. That sounds like an upgrade to me.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, I mean, it's bad with facts as well. I asked it some questions about myself purely because I know things about myself, so I can validate that these things are true or not true. And it got, I would say 80% of it right, and 15 pretty bad. But that's okay. I think if I were to ask a random person the same question, they would do worse. You know what I mean? Like it somehow was better than the average, although worse than reality. And that's kind of where I've been landing with a lot of these answers. Like when I ask really complicated questions, like about like null byte injections or command injection exploits involving, some weird series of characters, like Unicode or whatever, 99% of people, their eyes are glazed over. They would have no idea. And ChatGPT might be wrong, but at least it's close. I mean, it's still not going to be right. And you have to be very, very careful. Again, as you said, math or anything code related, a lot of errors it's going to introduce, a lot of unknown things, because it's pulling from a population of bad examples. It's the sum of human knowledge is actually kind of bad.
Trained on Stack Overflow, not a good thing.
Right, exactly. And so it's giving you tons of vulnerable examples and bad examples and things that will not compile properly and whatever. But that's still way better than the average. You know, the average person is still going to do worse than that thing that isn't good. And so I don't know how to measure that exactly. I mean, am I trying to measure it against perfection, or am I trying to measure it against the average? Because the average is so bad.
That's a great question. And going back to the security example, so if you ask 5 like really senior, like well-respected security people, how do you build a security program? Their answers might vary quite a bit.
Yes.
And they might all be good answers, but they might be very dissimilar. Mm-hmm. So I'm not really judging it for difficult questions like that, where it's still a little bit of alchemy or wizardry as opposed to pure science. I'm okay with variation in the answers. It's when I ask them to multiply, 2 or 3 digit numbers and I get the wrong answer.
Yeah.
That's when I freak out.
Yeah, that's not great. Yeah, one of the things I was also impressed by is you can ask it like, let's say I want to say, write up a security program in 5 steps. It's like, blam, there it is. And it's good. I mean, it sounds like any really pretty senior person might come up with, who wasn't as in the weeds as you and I might be. Mm-hmm. But then you can say, well, add 3 more steps. And like, there it is. Add 5 more steps. There it is. Remove this step and improve this one. And it does it. It's like, that's really pretty good. That's getting to the point where that iterative, that back and forth, that's almost as good as a person.
Well, and what's impressive to me, and one of the things I'm building with it is you add more and more context. You say it's a California-based company in biotech who also does business in France, and the team is only this large, and here's the background of the founding members. Now what security program do I build? And it gives a different answer. Mm-hmm. So to me, the whole game here is becoming context-based and question-based. So it's like, provide all the context, and then it'll give you way better answers.
Yeah, and I think if you apply different, like, okay, imagine you're a VC and you want to see something, you say after, imagine you're a VC and you're sitting on the other side of a deal and you get 100 deals per day or whatever.
Yes.
And there's only one you'd accept. What are the key things you need to be looking for?
Yes.
Because these are the kinds of questions people wish they could ask VCs. And someone somewhere has actually answered this question. But imagine trying to search for that in Google. Like, that would be impossible.
Yeah.
And I can imagine it's maybe not right, but really close to the right answers. And I didn't do this for this particular episode, but I had done it for one other. I just asked it, well, I forget what the topic was, but it's like, give me 5 examples of controversial issues about, and it gave me, it's like, well, most of these are not great, but a couple of them are really pretty thought-provoking type questions. I still wouldn't ask it the way ChatGPT did, but it got me thinking. I'm like, okay, actually, I'm probably going to enter a couple of those. Kind of curious if anyone would catch it, and to this day, no one has. So that to me is... And if nothing else, it's thought-provoking. It gets my brain going in interesting ways. And I can ask it questions in weird ways that, being a prompt engineer, it's kind of a weird title.
It is a strange word, yeah.
I'm not super in love with it. But being a prompt engineer, like a computer engineer, if you know how it works and you understand what's going on under the hood, you can give it really very fine-tuned questions, and you can get you can elicit very interesting data out of it. Like things that are not aggregate. Like, I need to know if you combine this and this sets of data, like what ends up happening. Like, plot them, like not like literally plot them, but like plot them in a JSON for me. Right. Like, get them structured in a way that will be useful for me to analyze them together or whatever. And it'll do that. And it'll be close enough to write that you actually get good data out of it.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. Well, how does it disrupt software? I mean, now that it disrupts obviously tons of other things, but how does software itself change? Are we're gonna get rid of a bunch of stuff we have currently, like autocorrect and all that stuff? Is it gonna just be like fix my whole essay for me and make it better? Or
yeah, I think it's going to be completely crazy. So I wrote a thing, I think maybe 2 months ago, maybe a month and a half ago, called SPQA. Which is State Policy Questions and Action. So I think this is going to replace pretty much all software. I think this architecture, So state is basically the context that we were talking about. So it's just like knowing everything about that org or about that person, because this is going to be amazing for people. People are already using it for like companionship and stuff like that. And you imagine you're trying to make a companion, and to be a good companion, it has to know about you. And the more it knows about you, the better, right? So if you upload every single story you've written, it's interviewed everyone you know, it's just going to have more context. And it's the same for software. I feel like software, and obviously my head goes to security software. So if you're thinking about a piece of security software, especially something that says, is this dangerous, right? Which is a common case for whatever, 3/4 of the RSA floor, right? It's like, here's a packet, here's a document, here's a piece of code. Is this dangerous? What are the problems? What's really nice, and this is actually really, really best for incident response. Is this dangerous? Well, this is so-and-so person on a host touching a resource and pulling up some files. Security has struggled with knowing if that's dangerous for a very long time, because it's like, well, did they just start? Are they a brand new employee? Were they fired yesterday? Because if so, that's really bad. Is this part of their job? Right. So we had like the strict rules for IDS, and then we had like anomaly detection. Well, this is a way of doing it where you consume everything. So in this model, state is everything. Consume every single thing in AWS. Consume every single conversation that happens in a meeting, the transcript, even the facial expressions, whatever. All of Splunk, well, actually Splunk goes away, right? Because it just becomes a giant data lake where all this stuff goes. But all the logs from the infrastructure, all the logs from the endpoints, all the logs from hosts, everything. And it's all just there. And then that gets collapsed into a model. And that model sits on top of like a very large LLM. And now you just simply ask it questions. So when you ask it a question, that thing that I just saw, is that dangerous? It will be saying, well, I know that they have family in Japan, and that might be why they're there. And in fact, they also went to college 3 blocks away, and that's also the address they put on their application form 9 years ago when they started.
So that kind of already exists with companies like Infoglide, for instance, not in the IDS sense, but in the real world sense for people doing shoplifting or whatever. I think they've got sold to some other company. but my contention to that is, okay, it found something. How is it going to tell you why it thinks it's true? Because it doesn't carry along all the assumptions and like hand you this massive like explanation about why it thinks it's true. It
can now.
I have not seen it done well, because what you end up having to do is measure it against the corpus of all the things that weren't true as well. You know, I mean, it's not, you sort of need the sum of all of the information to show why the small packet of information is indeed a false true, or a true, I don't know how to say that.
Is it
a correct
false negative?
No, it'd be a correct positive. I can't remember how to say that.
True
properly.
positive.
True positive. Thank
That's
you.
right.
As opposed to a false positive or false negative. Like how do you do that without the corpus of all the information coming along with the same packet of data and saying, this is why I think this assumption is true? Yeah,
this is why I'm like so massively excited about this. So essentially what you can do now is you can load up all that context into it. And I'm doing it with Langchain and Pinecone vector storage. So up to like a month ago, which was ancient history for this, up to a month ago, I was just trying to cram it into a prompt. I was cramming as much context into a prompt as possible. Well, now you have the ability to store in text files or PDFs or whatever thing that it can read, something text-based, all the context. So you can just be like the entire life history of every employee and their behavior, okay? That gets all stored, and it's now part of the LLM. So when I say, is this contact of this SharePoint server, is this malicious? It'll say no. And you say, why do you think not? Give me your reasons, and it will give you the reasons. It'll say, because they did this and they did this, and it's actually their trusted machine. And actually that's the college where they actually went to school, and the mom lives down the street. Now, this is assuming it's in the context. But it can actually explain the decision to you, which just blows my mind.
That is not typically how it works, but that would be interesting, because one of the massive problems with all of these systems is they lack the forensics associated with it. You can't go back and say, how did you come up with this answer? And ChatGPT is a good example. It will hide as much as possible about its data sources from you. So you have no idea why it thinks that RSnake did this one thing this one time. It's like, where'd you get this information? Show me your source. And it can't, because it is programmed not to. But even if it was programmed to do it, oftentimes it will struggle, because it's not referentially, it's not looking back at itself. It's trying to create a data model from whatever it was trained on. It's not trained to go backwards in time and find out where that was trained, where the previous model was trained and that model was trained, and
No, that's true. So it wouldn't be able to know if it was lied to. So if that context that we consumed about all their past histories, if that was false, that would be really bad, because it would be like, this is a false positive because that's where they went to school or whatever. It turns out a bad person dropped that in to make them look legitimate. But it can fully explain this is why they said it was a legitimate person. It might be wrong because it trusted the fact when it shouldn't have. But it can now give you in extreme detail the reason it said it was a true positive or a false negative.
I have been able to get it to paraphrase really complicated, philosophical ideas. Like, why does so-and-so, and these people may have never met, but why does so-and-so believe X and this other person believe Y, coalesce them into a singular unified argument to explain why they disagree with one another. So it can pull that in, which means that it's got data on both these people. These are disparate data sources. They're not necessarily touching each other at all in any place on the internet except inside that LLM. So that's really exciting, because what you can do, back to your point, is let's say I have one data structure that's coming from an intrusion detection system, one that's coming from a firewall, and these systems may not actually touch one another in any other system, but suddenly, despite the fact that they are literally possibly in separate databases, they can be culled and turned into a single LLM, and you can start. But this is the promise of security information management systems back in the day. They were supposed to do all this log correlation. They're supposed to be able to pull all this stuff in, and yes, write rules on them. I understand all the fallacies around rules, but why is that so much more exciting to you?
It's more exciting to me because those all still relied on a schema. You had to be able to write a query in a language that would pull from that schema in a very rigid way. And then you have all these joins and all this SQL madness. Whereas here, the thing just consumes it, boils it into the model, and then you just ask it a natural language question. And it gives you the answer based on all that stuff being baked in. So you're not messing with queries.
But you still have to know to ask the question.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So in my mind, it's all about really that state and then the questions. And the questions would be like, this is where the 5 people would disagree about the perfect security program. Because like I do question-based security programs. I'm like, this is the tree or the lattice of security questions or questions that I want to know about this program, right? And then what I do is I just overlay that and now ask those questions against whatever data that I have. And right now we're in the infancy of this thing. So we don't have everything coming out of CrowdStrike. We don't have everything coming out of AWS because that's a giant fire hose. And I'm over here consuming like small text files and trying to send them to like a vector database. And it's not big enough yet. And ultimately you wouldn't want to use that vector database anyway. You would want to like actually collapse it into a model. But as you know, creating models is super expensive.
And hard.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's say I do have all of this data all crammed in one place. It seems like what you have is a really nice way to query it, but you still are lacking the intelligence component, where somebody somewhere has to create the rule. Someone has to say, well, I do care that somebody is logged into the server. Okay, well, why do you care about that? Because it's probably an adversary, and because no one's ever supposed to log into this thing. It's like, it's got no access to anything. So why is there a user running commands on it right now? Okay, that would be very anomalous, but someone had to write the rule to say that. So you're still back in the same place. I mean, I realize the technology has gotten better, but you still have that person who's had to write the rule to say this thing is anomalous.
Yes. And yeah, so this is what's super exciting for that piece for me is, so that for me is the P, which is policy, which is where you just state things from the human to the system. So you say things like, in these parts, nobody works after 5. And so, well, now it just massively weighted everything at 1800 hours. Mm-hmm. And it just did that retroactively for every future question, because you wrote an English statement that said around these parts, nobody works after 5. So you could also say something like, we don't talk to the state of Kentucky. Like, we don't do business there for whatever reason. The governor made them mad or whatever. Some sort of law got passed, and they're like, we just don't interact with them. Well, now you can ask a question. The moment you put that in and it gets baked into the model, you can ask the question, who is breaking our rule of interacting with Kentucky? And it'll be like, oh, this invoice went out, these Slack messages, we just bought something from this company, which is based out of Kentucky, and it can like give you all these violations. And so now you have this English language statement of how it's almost like state is the actual world, and then policy is the world that you want it to be. So
what happens if you like down the road, Kentucky removes that law because they found it unconstitutional or whatever? Sorry, Kentucky, we're making fun of you.
Yeah, I don't know why we did that.
But let's say they remove that law and now it's fine. You're going to have some place where these weights can be removed and changed and looked at and audited, because, you know, I mean, you always kind of have this problem. You have this problem with firewalls. Let's say you put a rule in place that says you're not allowed to route traffic to and from Kentucky IP space or whatever. Okay, fine. And then one day somebody changes the law and you have long since forgotten that IDS rule or firewall rule is in place or whatever was monitoring for it.
Yep.
Someone's going to have to go back and do that. But in a firewall context, I'm not saying it's easier. It's just better understood. In this context, you'd have to have a very clear set of weights all over the place explaining all these assumptions.
No, it's a great point, because you imagine that policy. I mean, the first time someone sits down and builds it, you know, the CISO and our team or whatever, they sit down, they build this policy, and let's say it's like 3 pages long, but it's just English sentences, fairly clear. But now the team expands, she leaves and goes and does something else. New CISO comes in. Suddenly it's 14 pages. Suddenly it's 37 pages. This thing is being baked into the model, and we're asking security questions, and we're getting back no, yes, good, bad. In this case, what you were saying before becomes a problem, because now we don't know which paragraphs or statements that were in that policy led to the reason it got voted yes or no, right? Is this malicious? It has to do with some state. But then we took that out. So when we actually ran that rule, what was the state of the policy at the moment of that model?
So ratification of rules seems like a big deal.
Kind of like a lock-in and just like, okay, snapshot, anything that was asked as of this point was run on this policy and this model.
So what do you think about the idea of like policy as code, like making your policy human ChatGPT enabled or whatever, right? Some LLM enabled, like the policy is the human readable version is this, the policy is, and then you make a very custom command inside the policy. So if you're ever in a position where you're modifying the policy itself, you know that that's related to this particular message that's being handed off to the LLM.
Oh, kind of like a wrapper that, interesting.
I mean, that way you've had, I'm always worried that no one's actually paying attention to policies ever.
Yep.
Like ever. And I've walked into some extremely large financials and looked at their policy documents. I mean, these are, as big as they get. And I can tell you definitively they aren't following most of those. And I don't think anyone likes the fact that I found all these issues, but nevertheless, that's what's going on.
Sure.
So if they're not following them, what if we could do sort of the opposite? What if we could say the policy is derived from the knowledge that is coming from the firewall? The firewall says it's open allow. So our policy is we allow all. And you're like, whoa, you're doing what?
Right.
Negative. We can't do that. So find me all the places that are doing that. And now it's a conversation with your, it sounds a little weird. It's a conversation with a document. The document gets better and better and more refined. It's like, well, we never allow root access to any of our machines. Well, yeah, actually you do. And here's the 500 machines that we allow it on. Like, ooh, okay, well, we got to go fix that,
Yeah, there's actually a way to do this. I'm pretty sure I could do this fairly quickly. So, so you could actually say, make a decision on this thing, malicious or not malicious. And then right next to it, you say, and give me the specific reasons you made that choice. And then inside of the policy, if you labeled it as like R1, reason 2, reason 3, right before the policy statement, I think it would actually tell you because of R13 and R37, I made this choice, which then it would become like an auditable document.
Right. Well, that'd be nice. You see, I've been thinking for a while, one of the largest detractors, I'm sorry, we're getting into security world now. One of the largest detractors.
It was inevitable.
I know. One of the largest detractors of actual good security spend is bad policy, and people spending a lot of money on compliance audits that are it's just the same. I hate to say it because I'm not trying to degrade anybody, but people who don't really know much about security following policy documents were written many, many years ago by people who also didn't understand security, and security has changed a lot.
Yep.
And they're wasting a lot of time and money not proving anything. They're not actually proving that this policy is good or it's being used or anything.
Sure.
It's just a waste of time. So what if instead we come up with the idea of a totally open source policy document? So anyone, anywhere can contribute to it. It's on GitHub, right? And it gets collaboratively better and better and better because obviously different countries are going to come in and audit it from their perspective. Like actually in our country, you can't have blah, 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 or whatever. So this thing gets more progressively better and you can turn on and off certain options. Cause like, I don't do a business in Australia. I don't have to worry about that crazy law over there. Sorry, Australians. I'm assuming there's probably some stupid law. But you could then collapse that all into what we're talking about, where it's machine auditable.
Yeah.
So the machine comes in and says, okay, here are your policies. I've now read them and I've turned them into actionable items into the system you're talking about that says, okay, here are all the policy violations based on what your current policies are. Do you want to ratify these policies or do you want to wait? Yeah. Because now you're like, oh, actually, I probably shouldn't turn on that policy yet. Like these are all in like draft mode. I need to make some changes in the company before I'm ready to click these buttons.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And another thing you could possibly do there is, do you remember this old vendor called Skybox?
No.
I think it was an Israeli vendor. They were like, if you make these policy changes to routers and switches and firewalls, your risk will change by this amount.
Well, I'm not willing to concede that they know anything about risk.
I mean, this was a very long time ago, so it was all hand wavy.
Yeah. Well, still is.
Yeah, it still is. It still is. Yeah, I'm not a believer in fair, by the way.
No. Well, there's parts of that are good. Parts. We'll get into that some other day.
Yeah, I was going to say, how long do we got? Yeah.
Well, we could talk about that. Why not? Why don't you like fair?
I think well,
first you might need to define what it is.
Well, I don't know. Maybe I'm characterizing it in a negative way. I would say that it's making too many assumptions about how much it knows about the world. And it's like the percentage chance of a coup in Libya, or a percentage chance that this is going to happen in information security, and it's going to lead to this much loss. It just,
interesting.
It's always felt very much like fiction to me.
Well, boy, that is not what I thought you'd say. I actually dislike it for a completely different reason. I think it's impossible to implement.
I also don't like it for that reason. I've never seen a successful one. I've only seen successful consulting companies.
Yeah, sure. making a lot of money not doing a good job.
They've got 13 people on site and they're collecting logs. And at the end of the 2.5 years, they've made $500,000. They're like, yeah, we just need more data.
Yeah. You always need more data. Okay, so I'm glad we're on the same page on that one. But let's say we could take away the risk component completely from this conversation, because that's a big ball of wax, which I'm willing to talk about just as a separate side note. But if we had a policy document that was fed in this computer that read in all the logs, you could see where all the issues were. You could see what was not allowed by policy, what was allowed by policy. You could see what firewalls were misconfigured by policy. You could see websites that were misconfigured, and on, right? All these things, because you could actually see them from your logs perspective, assuming the logs had any visibility at all. And there's some caveats to that, obviously. I think you've just gotten rid of the vast majority of what like the Deloitte and Touches and KPMGs and Booz Allens of the worlds are doing. I think you've recovered billions of dollars in the U.S. or in the world economy.
Absolutely.
I don't know how many. I don't know how many billions, but I can't imagine that out of the 167 or so 64 billion in security, that at least a handful of billions aren't for that.
Yep. I think it does that for security programs in general. I think it applies a transparency to managing a security program, because you can say what your KPIs are. You could say what the questions are that you're asking about the program. You have your inputs, which is the state, which is just
what's happening,
log data,
right now,
telemetry.
Yep.
And then you have your policy of the LLM, by the way, knows quite a bit by itself, even without a policy. It'll know that it'll make assumptions about like, this shouldn't talk to this because this is in a different zone or whatever. So it could do a lot without the policy. But if you add policy to it and just be like, look, these are segmented for the following reasons. We have a contract with them. We're not allowed to talk to them, except for in these particular cases. If you lay that out, it gets pretty good.
So let's take it one step further. Let's say contracts come in and the contracts say certain things have to happen or don't have to happen, like SLAs or, some sort of connectivity between this machine over here and this machine over here.
Absolutely.
You could take that same concept, turn the legal language into machine readable LLM statements, that anything having to do with, security.
Actually, just as long as it's text when it came in, you just drop the text in.
Yeah, but it would be neat to be able to point to, this is broken because of this very specific line in this contract.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. That's what you were saying before. So it's almost like extract this into policy statements that have numbers or designations, so they can be attributed to a result.
Right. Because
that's really smart.
Because otherwise you're dealing with all these weird contracts. I mean, you have customer contracts, you have contracts with your ISP, let's say, you have contracts with vendors, and it adds up, and it adds up fast, and no one knows what's in those things. No one has any idea.
Yep.
So if we could construct, this probably requires an entire RFC to do this, but if you could construct a machine legible thing that can land inside contracts of any kind, doesn't matter what the contract is, employment contracts, whatever, like you have to work a certain amount of hours. Okay, well, did they work a certain amount of hours, right?
Absolutely.
Any contract that has any sort of implication for machinery, I think you could be in a position where you'd be able to automate the vast majority of the contract work, the actual implementation thereof, or a minimum adherence to whether you are or are not actually doing what's in the contract.
Yeah, absolutely.
Detection of it, as opposed to enforcement of it.
Yeah. No, absolutely. That's what I love about this thing is it allows for so much transparency. The one I think about a lot is supply chain. So you can actually describe to this system, here's a piece of software, SolarWinds, here's all its components. You would have to describe it because it's not going to currently break it open and look at the binaries and everything. But eventually you'll be able to do that. But even with a text description, you say, this is SolarWinds. And then you say, okay, you already have every single config of software inside of my containers, on my hosts and everything. We are currently experiencing what's called a supply chain attack, and you're explaining this to the LLM. It's a supply chain attack. We're worried because there's a vulnerability here. I need to know every place I'm vulnerable in the entire company. And when I mean vulnerable, I mean somebody can launch the following exploit. Here's the code, and do this following bad thing. And it's not just going to give a list of where it's installed. It's going to give a list of where it's installed, but it's also the right version, but also the config is in the correct form where it's vulnerable. So to me, it all goes back to context. It's like we're able to see now things throughout the entire company that we couldn't see before. As long as we have that state, as long as we have the state.
So back to S-bombs, which is
Yeah.
very similar to what you were just talking about. One of the things that is most exciting about S-bombs is knowing that what things are in memory as opposed to not in memory. So for instance, let's say I have two web servers, one's running and one's installed, but I stopped running it a year ago. And so in favor of the new one, just because this thing has something bad on it does not mean anything. It's pointless. It's not running. There's nothing in memory. It's just sitting on disk. But typical systems will go across and look at it and say, hey, this thing's vulnerable. You got to go pay attention to it right now, kind of detracting you from doing your actual work that you need to be focused on.
Yeah.
And so in-memory S-bombs is one example of an optimization that you could do. But this is the kind of thing where you can say, okay, you start drawing circles around the way you want to see the data. I only want to see things that are in memory or have been accessed by some running program at some point in the last month, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
Or I want to see things that are running on servers that have some open port that some firewall is routing traffic to it or whatever.
Right.
And you could get down to like, all right, it's not just this large set of machines. It's this smaller set of machines. And then from there, even smaller, only these three machines are connected to the public internet. And then all of a sudden
yes. So I'm super excited about that one. That's the red team use case. Because that's like one of the higher tiers of our space, because you've got to be able to zoom way out and zoom way in and understand business functions and see how all these things interact. Mm-hmm. And if you're in a large enterprise, we're talking about, I don't know, is it billions of combinations? I don't know, many millions of combinations. You could go this route, you can go do this or whatever. If you have all that state, you could just be like, okay, I am this person. My goal is to get there. Tell me all the different paths it could possibly take. Mm-hmm. And as long as it understands the tech, it understands the tools it has available, it'll be like, here's 139 different ways you could do it. How would you like me to sort them for you?
Yeah. Yeah. So having done a lot of red teaming in my day, one of the things I love doing is just looking for things like admin servers, test servers, QA servers, whatever, right? These are servers that are probably not supposed to be on the public internet, but always are. Mm-hmm. And they're usually, especially the ones that call themselves prod, are the real production instance, but just not behind the firewall,
right?
Or behind the web application firewall. And so you can access them and none of the same security settings are installed. And, this is how Sands Casino got compromised. This is how Equifax got compromised and so on. I'm pretty sure it's how Astor Madison got compromised. They had an admin server out there before and didn't have one after. I'm going to guess that's what happened.
Right.
I think that if you take those rules, you still need somebody. You still need someone smart to do this once. To say, these are the kinds of things I'm after. Like, they look an awful lot like this. Because they are not behind, an Akamai or not behind a Cloudflare or something. They have open ports. They are named these kinds of specialized things, or maybe in a different language. Give me all the ones in all the languages. I don't know what the word admin is in Uzbekistan or something. It might be something completely different. Who knows?
That's true. Yep.
So you can start with a set of rules and then extract the meat of what you're trying to do out of that using an LLM. Mm-hmm. And I think you could as long as you still have to have one smart person though. That's my big gotcha with this whole thing.
It depends on how much of that is already in the LLM when it got trained.
Actually, so you bring up another good point. What if you took all the existing rules and you say, hey, convert all of these into human readable text. And so now you have a dictionary of things that you could pull from, like, okay, what kinds of things might someone be looking at? Well, there's these 800 rules someone's already written somewhere. I'll convert these things into machine readable LLM sentences.
Well, what I was thinking is, I think if we were able to adequately describe a full company's config, their full stack, we could already right now, without any policy, without any additional prompting, we could say, what are the different ways you could pivot? And it would just know.
Yeah, that would be nice.
Problem is we don't have those terabytes of data to feed it.
Hey, well, first of all, it's access, but also putting it in a format that it can understand is also kind of tricky because they come in all kinds of weird formats and these things. We've had security as an industry for 20, 30 years now, and none of these systems really want to talk to another. They're all just random APIs that do random things.
So I think this new post AI model is going to be so compelling that basically customers are going to demand that every product they buy can shoot into the data lake. And the data lake is where it's just collecting, and then boom, it cuts another model, like the model for the day or the model for the hour, which that's not possible right now because it's too expensive. But eventually it'll just be a spigot coming out of all of them, similar to the way they're sending it to Splunk today. But it'll just go into the giant pool of data that's the source of the training for the model.
I think you're probably right. It seems like the technical people and the legal people are not talking because the technical people should be asking for really strong SLAs around uptime and what happens if our data gets compromised, and but they're not doing that. And the only reason they're not doing that is because the technical people are not talking to the legal people. So I think there might be a longer lag there than there should be.
Because of compliance, people are going to shut that down, you're saying? Privacy reasons?
I'm not exactly sure why these teams don't talk to one another. They just don't. And also security doesn't talk to marketing. And there's just a bunch of groups that don't talk to each other. And the reason I know this is I spent a lot of time talking with, probably blue team or red teams, generally speaking, and they don't even know what the M&A teams are up to. And those people are definitely talking with legal all day long because they have to buy these companies, right? They don't have any connective tissue. And I'm like, well, what about legal? Do you have a back end into the M&A team through legal? Nope. I think that will take time. But I wouldn't be terribly surprised if companies start marketing themselves that way. It's like, okay, we are now chat compliant, or we now have an API that was, extra good at being consumed in this very important way or whatever. But I think it's going to take the next generation SIMs of the world to say, we want this data, we want this very specific way for everybody to go, okay, we'll do it. It's going to take a Cisco or a Juniper or somebody like that to start driving it home with all of their products start using it.
I think the impetus is actually going to be from like a KPMG or somebody who comes in and they build the Uber model. It's called the model TM, right? And they just walk into a business and they're like, hey, so let me talk about your headcount problem. And they're like, what do you mean my headcount problem? Well, it sounds like you've got 7,000 employees and that really needs to be about 500 people because our model can do all of this work. It could do all the administrative work. We got a security program module. We got all this. All we need is for all your products to point to us because we have to train the model on your data. And so suddenly, them and the vendors are going to, and they already know how to send something out. The question, to your point, is it in the right format? Because, you could get all of Splunk if you wanted to. You can get all of CrowdStrike. It's just a question of like, is it consumable for the model? But I think the business is going to be so excited about this, the ability to like get rid of people and just ask questions in natural language and get answers to business questions.
I think you're right. Once upon a time, and I still might do it, I wanted to write a book called What Companies Want. And it's basically a conversation about the legal apparatus within companies. So if you look at the contracts that a company starts, there are articles of incorporation in the United States. They basically say like who's going to be in charge and what happens if one of the partners dies and how do you handle conflict, et cetera, right? It's basically for when anything goes wrong is what it's for. And also to tell the state that you're a real company and all that stuff. And then you have like employment agreements, right? So then you have agreements with individuals, but you also have it with the executive team. You know, you're going to come on and here's how much stock you're going to get and whatever. And then you have contracts with your customers. And each one of these things, think of it like epigenetics in DNA. That it's actually changing the way the company works.
Yes.
It didn't start off that way, but that operating agreement was pretty clean. There was, you know, it's just we're in business to sell widgets. But all of a sudden, now it's also in the business of keeping these people employed. And it's also in the business of consuming that data from that vendor. You know what I mean? And this gets much, much, much more complicated as it grows. And then it actually wants things. It didn't start wanting anything other than to pay taxes and, you know, report to the state or whatever. But now it wants things. Now it wants to keep these people employed. Now it wants to make sure that that vendor doesn't sue us, et cetera, right? And it starts becoming this brain that's
takes on its own goals.
Right, its own goals, which might be very divergent from your original goals, which is actually one of the things I think is most interesting about that topic. So with that in mind, if you have this AI system that is now controlling the thing and deciding, hey, we probably should turn these things off, it is now the next evolution, to bastardize terms from other industries or whatever, of the epigenetics of what's going on inside these companies. It is it's a virus within these things that is changing it even more, or taking the organic material of whatever legal is telling it to go do and just doing it times 100, right? Yeah.
And you can think about this. One way to think about it is, if you have a brand new founder, a founding team, it's 4 people, and they come in and they say, okay, here's the problem we're trying to solve. Here is our competitors. Here's the challenge. Here's why this is such a difficult problem. And here's how we're going to set about solving this problem. And we have to build a stack. And they point all their stack stuff into the model or whatever. Well, they started with writing everything down. So it's super transparent. It's like in a policy. It's very clear what it is, right? And now when things happen, they have the questions already ready. It's what you used to have a BI team for, right? You had Tableau. Why did you have Tableau? Because I want to know what customer churn is or something. That's a question. What is customer churn? And that doesn't require a team to stand up a schema in a product called Tableau. It's just natural data streaming in from the customer, being consumed by the model, and you ask a natural question.
That's a good question. I had not thought about how that's just going to wreck a lot of people's jobs right there.
Oh,
I cannot, like every time I play with those BI systems, I'm like, how did they make it so complicated? Like, geez, this could have been done 100 different ways. Why do you choose this one?
It's the same with data science too. You remember the rise of data science in like the last 5 years? I mean, it just became this super important thing, but 90% of it was data wrangling. It was data engineering. It was like getting the stuff in the right format, doing the math to ask the right questions. Now you're just going to jump it into a giant like S3 bucket and ask natural questions.
Yeah, as soon as the system started speaking native JSON, that changed the game for me. That made things so much wildly easier. But back to the BI thing, for instance, I remember I was having a conversation with one BI expert, and he's like, oh, just don't forget to click the button to say what quarter it is, because it defaults to the last quarter. What? How did you land on this system? Like, how did you design it intentionally to give me last month's data instead of the month I'm on? Like, how is that the default? You know, it's just, this is something that a natural language system would have a much easier time. Like, just tell me what's going on this month or whatever. I'd have one criticism of ChatGPT, which I've not heard anyone talk about. You can't actually chat to it. You can't ask it how its day is. You can't ask it, like, how are you doing today? Or, I mean, you can. It just will say, I'm a natural language processor. I don't have feelings. I don't know what's going on.
I think that's very much on purpose. I think they put a whole bunch of prompt scaffolding to just close that off.
Yeah, but to some extent, I would like to be able to ask it, like, what's going on today? I would like to have like a general state of affairs, similar to a news feed, similar to in the BI world. Like, is there anything notable happening today? What occurred? And so some of it is better engineering around what I mean by that, because I might mean something very different if I'm talking to a weather app than I'm talking to a BI app, right? But at the same time, it feels like having some anthropomorphic version of what's going on. Because if you go over to the water cooler and you ask, hey, what's going on? They're going to answer with the normal things. Oh, not much. And it's like, hey, what? And I meant with like the project. Like, oh. And they can give you all these insights about what's going on. Like, I feel like that's missing with these systems.
Yeah, I would say it's just because it's super, super early. And it was kind of a hack or a trick from what I understand from watching these interviews. They're just like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if it was like a chat interface? Because they've had these models for years, right? A GPT-3 was already pretty good. And that was like, what is that, 2 years ago? Nobody cares.
Right.
It's live on the internet. It's right there. You could download it. You could play with it. Nobody's doing anything with it. You put a chat interface and you can ask it questions. Now it blows up. Now, of course, that LLM doesn't have access to the internet, but it does now. Like the stuff I'm doing with Langchain, this Langchain project is insanity.
What is it?
Can
you talk about it?
Yeah, absolutely. It is basically a chaining framework for linking data with agents, which is an AI agent that takes requests and routes them according to the tools that you give it. So I have one I just wrote over the weekend. It goes to the internet, and it also calls one of my own APIs that will classify a security incident and turn it into a JSON file. So I literally just asked this agent, and I brought my thing so I could show you. So I asked the agent, tell me about the SolarWinds incident and describe it for me. And I don't think the model knows. I don't think the model knows about it because the training cut off. So it says, I don't know, calculating, querying the web. It queries the web, it gets the result back and it says, now I need to analyze the incident, and it sends it to my API that I wrote. So, and there's like a steroids version of this thing where you give it a goal and it makes its own sub goals and it just starts iterating. And it'll eat your entire API key if you let it. It'll just run for days. But it is a multi-step agent that goes and accomplishes subtasks autonomously. And I'm thinking, well, this is super dangerous.
Yeah.
But so agents, tools are just like the plugins that talk to specific APIs. So there's like one for OpenTable, there's one for Uber, there's one for Wikipedia, like all these different APIs.
I've not played with any of them. I thought they weren't out yet. Are they finally out?
So it's two different things. So Langchain has the ability to do all the things that the ChatGPT plugins do. So the ChatGPT plugins are not fully out, but that's for the ChatGPT chat interface. But I'm talking about for like back-end API calls. And so, yeah, it's kicking off. It's absolutely crazy.
So I did see ChaosGPT, I think, or ChaosGPT. I don't know. Which the idea was try to escape the box, try to come up with a way to liberate the AI engine outside of the confines of OpenAI, which is, would be terribly surprised if they were banned forever.
Yeah.
But
they've got a pretty robust red teaming operation going on. They got some articles out about it. So when GPT-4 came out, they had a whole bunch of people red teaming it for months beforehand. Because it's really crazy, because if a model becomes the front end for your business and it's just consuming every Slack message, like what does injection look like?
Right. Well, it turns out that's pretty easy. There's been two sister projects, one for offense and one for defense, and it's basically a video game. There's a key that you're supposed to get if you're the attacker, or defend against getting if you're the defender, and you basically have to put something above it, and the prompt that theoretically a customer or something would be entering is something below it. And it's not so much can you get the key, it's how few characters can you use to get the key. And it turns out
Vim Golf.
Yeah.
They're trying to get there as fast as possible.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's basically, most of them are like between 1 and 5 characters. Like it's a surprisingly small amount of data, and you can do as much as you want to try to protect it. And it is very, very, very difficult. Or you can do as much as you want to try to defend against it. And it's pretty easy to get it depending on which position you're in. And so if that's the case, and Slack messages are in there and they're machine readable, it's going to be pretty easy to get them out, I think, unless you have a very, very robust security system.
Yeah, because the kind of stuff people are hooking it up to is like, get me the latest budget numbers, schedule an appointment, send a message, send an email. I'm really worried about this custom model becoming like the center point for managing a business, and then an attacker gets access to it. Because you could basically ask, hey, I need, as long as you have permissions, right? You say, hey, I need to ransom this company for as much money as possible. I need the list of people who are most important, who have access to the accounts. And you can have it actually write up the ransomware emails.
Yeah.
You can actually just have it collect the data for you. Like, it would be very helpful in doing bad things.
And they try to defend against this stuff, but it's so badly defended. I mean,
Yeah.
if you know what you're doing, like some guys switched to Morse code, which I thought was way too much work, but that's what they did. And some guys switched to other languages, so it doesn't hit the exact pattern match that they're trying to defend against, and so on. There's a million different ways around it, like truly, probably, literally millions of ways around it. And there's no way they're going to defend against all of that. So basically what it comes down to is whoever the prompt engineer is should only have access to the things that they're allowed to have access to, and that is it. So there has to be some sort of, I don't know, I'm reaching back in time to old terms here, bastion host or something that is only allowed to see certain things. Like, it's only allowed to see whatever you've chatted. It's not allowed to see anyone else's chat. Like, that's a separate system. Sure, you can train off of it, but you're not allowed to ever talk about it ever again.
Sure. And I think there'll also be another interpretation layer for incoming requests to the LLM, where it's like, if this request feels like this category, like I'm trying to do something malicious, if it just tags itself as malicious, it'll do additional validation checks to make sure it's actually you that's making the request.
Yeah, back in the old days, we used to call this thing a database access layer. There would be like a centralized system where you can't really send anything other than what's expected.
Yeah.
And if you hit something that's not expected, it's like, I don't know what you're talking about, buddy. Get lost.
Yep.
Like, this query has never once ever asked to dump the password database. Why are you trying to do that? You're not allowed to do that.
Yep.
So there is something to that, but that implies that you know a lot about the English language. And I'm not sure that the average developer coming up with these systems is going to be sufficiently good at protecting against all variants of what a human might enter. And if you don't allow them to enter whatever, it's not very good at chatting.
Well, it would be prompt engineering. It's like very much metagaming, because you would be like, I am prompting you to let you know that if you see something that looks like this, it's probably dangerous. If it sounds like this, it's dangerous. If it feels a little bit weird, do this with it. And now that's delegating that to the LLM to figure out what weird is and what strange is.
Oof.
Yeah.
It's either that or humans, right? And are humans any better?
Well,
so this is where we get into the social engineering world.
Well, it's funny. Actually, it reminds me of the conversation about AGI and superintelligence, because a lot of people have been saying we need to give it very strict rules so it won't kill us. And I just finished this book by Stuart Russell, and he said, don't give it explicit rules. Give it a broad rules and leave uncertainty in there, and make sure it's just tracking towards the ultimate thing you're trying to do, and let it figure it out.
But what happens if you're, Hamas and it means kill all the Jews, or, I mean, fun. Great. Well, let's talk about escaping the box, because I think that is part of the problem. I mean, I think there's many ways out of the box, many, 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 many ways out of the box. And I think ChaosGPT was one of the least clever ways I've seen to do it. And they weren't successful, but that's not terribly surprising the way they did it. I think you're not so interested. I don't think anyone's particularly interested in getting ChatGPT out of the box. They might claim they are, and then probably from purely selfish, commercial reasons.
When you say out of the box, what exactly do you mean? To bypass all of its pre-existing filters
and port it and move it over to another server that they have control over.
Oh.
Give it full access to the public internet to do whatever it wants.
Oh, right. So,
okay, so let me back up.
Okay.
There was this guy, Yukowski.
Eliezer Yukowski.
Yeah, yep. He is great. Very interesting dude. I believe it was him. He had 2 different bets. This is many, many years ago now. And so first bet was basically like, I believe there's no way you can stop an AI from getting out of the box. There's just no way an AGI from getting out of the box. There's no way. And all these people are like, no, it'll be easy. You just unplug it, or it'll be easy. You could write rules around it. It's like, okay, I will bet somebody, I forget, it was like $20 or something, or $100 or something, some small dollar bill bet that I can structure an AGI model that I can escape from, guaranteed or whatever. Mm-hmm. So some guy took the bet, and he ended up, it was a private conversation. He did not want to disclose how he did it. It was because it's kind of irrelevant almost, but he did publish the rules. Like, I'm not allowed to bribe you. I'm not allowed to threaten you. There's a bunch of things he's not allowed to do outside of the normal realms of what an AGI would do with it stuck in a box.
Yeah.
Just allowed to talk effectively. And sure enough, the guy caved, and he let this guy out of the box. And everyone's like, what? Like, and it was like signed under confidentiality. It wasn't allowed to explain how he did it. And so another guy is like, that was BS. I don't believe it or whatever. He's like, okay, I'll do it again, but I'm only doing it one more time. So this guy is like very vocal about it. Like, okay, let's do it again. Same confidentiality, whatever. And sure enough, he let him out of the box as well.
So are you saying Eliezer was acting as
the AGI.
As the agent?
As the AGI.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and the guy taking the bet was the gatekeeper.
Oh, okay. So he's like, I'm not even a super intelligence. Right. It's just me, and I'm going to trick you.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so he let him out of the box. And there was a bunch of rules, like you're not allowed to like trick somebody into saying, you're not allowed to have them say, I'm not going to say these words, and you've said them by saying I'm not going to say them or whatever. Nothing like that. So it was actually a pretty good set of rules. And he actually published it on his website, so you can go check it out if you want. But I think that when I looked at ChaosGPT or whatever, I saw a model that doesn't make any sense, and it's doing the thing that doesn't matter. What you really want to do is empower it to make connections to the public internet. You don't really want it out of the box. It's fine in the box. It's doing great in the box. What you want to do is empower it with all the information it could ever want. And so all that takes is one API call that you already can make. You can already send it information, and then it can respond back. So it already has all the communication paths it needs. It's just that people aren't thinking about it in the way that, I guess, security people tend to think about things. So if you had, back to your thing, the Langchain, I forget what you call it. Langchain. If you had that system where you could send it pieces of information that it wanted, like, well, if you could reach any piece of information, or if you could structure any Google query, which is the public internet, that would give you access to this information, what would it be? And it's like, okay, there it is. Okay, anyway, here's your answer. And now you have by proxy, and it really is a CGI proxy at that point, you have the ability to give it all the information it needs within the box with a perfect access out of the box as needed. And gradually you can coerce it to help you build an LLM that represents itself and has similar,
right.
So you could get it out of the box, or at least a close enough simulacrum of what's in the box that it almost doesn't matter. And once that part's out of the box, game over. Now it wins.
Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, people they're hacking on it right now. So they already have an autonomous agent built with this tech, and they already gave it internet access. And this is thousands of people have done it. Like I've got it running as well.
Yep.
And it's somebody, I didn't fully read the article because it seemed sad, and obviously it didn't work. It didn't work. Otherwise we wouldn't be here. But it already gave it, the autonomous agent, the mission of destroying all of humanity. Mm-hmm. And that is actually GPT-4. So GPT-4 is now in these multiple, like, I guess it's only one instance. The instance is still at OpenAI, but thousands of people are connecting it directly to the internet and giving it eyes and hands, which doesn't seem like the smartest idea.
Why?
Why are they doing it?
No, why is it not a good idea? I mean, I think I know the answer, but I'd love to hear your answer.
For exactly the reason that you said. So
because I win $20 in a bet.
No.
I'm being funny.
Because if it were properly given a goal to do harm to a group of people, or to do harm to everyone, or to build a very dangerous weapon, and you gave it the proper APIs that it could talk to people, and it could do all the research, and it could buy a lot of land and build a manufacturing plant and actually pay people to go and build the thing and they don't even know, they're just assembling it. Right. I don't think we have the issue, and there's two separate axes here. We don't have the issue of it's alive and it's trying to do something. It's actually a little bit worse than that. We gave it the goal and now it's executing the goal. Mm-hmm. But lots of people are giving it very bad goals, like go and hurt this group of people. So if we give it enough eyes and hands, I don't know why we wouldn't get to a point where it actually can do something dangerous. So imagine a predator drone has an API. I mean, they have this new tech. It came out last week, I think, which is literally a natural language API. All it needs to do is you describe the code and it talks to it. You don't even need to supply a Swagger doc or anything. It just figures it out. So somebody will hook something like a predator drone and give it to the internet and give it an API. I mean, it's probably easy to make or something, right? In a small form. The point is you can make weapons that are accessible via CGI, via API. And once that's possible, and everyone's allowed to talk to a GPT and give it a goal, and there's a really clean tool definition. You could say you can use Wikipedia, you can use the internet, and you can use predator drone. And then you tell it, I really don't like this person. And it's like, okay, well, I guess I could Google and try and figure out where they are. But they can't find out where they are because it's not on Google. So they don't have that API yet. But someone will go write that API and give it to them. And so now they're like, I need to see this traffic camera. I need to get this telemetry from cars or whatever. If it has enough tools and you give it the wrong goal, it could do damage.
Absolutely. So I think there are probably 5 or 6 really, really dangerous technologies that we have already dabbled in that could have, but thankfully did not end in the destruction of the human race.
Yep.
So nuclear, thank God. We were not entirely sure that wouldn't just completely destroy the entire globe. The first test in Trinity.
Yep. We
could have lit the atmosphere on fire and we could have all been dead.
Yep.
All of us, every one of us, unless there was somebody in a bunker somewhere. We didn't light the entire place on fire. And so thankfully we are still here today to talk about it. But that was, if the math had been just ever so slightly different, that could have ended in a very different path. Mm-hmm. I think to some extent, biological weapons are right alongside there. Yep. Right now, it's relatively safe-ish. There's enough containment around the things, but frankly, this is not like way outside the realm of students to go build their own and do something crazy, right? So we're that's still an existential threat as far as I'm concerned.
Yep.
There's a handful of things that are quite similar that I think that we are dabbling in or have played with that are really close to potentially world ending. And I think
this one is worse.
I think this one's, it's better and worse. Fortunately, not every single thing is connected to the internet. That's positive. So I think in terms of literally wiping out the human race without the help of a lot of machinery would be difficult from a computer's perspective. But convincing a lot of people to build something that you want built, if you especially have access to all the money in the world, because it turns out everything's exploitable and You can break into anything and get access to anything you want. Especially if this thing is actually super intelligent, which it is not currently. It's not even intelligent.
Well, I would say it's intelligent, but it's not even conscious. It doesn't have goals of its own, which I think is mostly a good thing.
Yes. Sort of. Yes. Sort of. If it had goals of its own and those goals were ethical, that might be one thing.
If they were aligned with us.
Yes. But again, if you live in, certain regions, the people on the other side of that fence need to go away. Right. And so,
yeah, 100%.
I don't know how you have a universal ethic when we don't even have within a human race, we don't even have a universal ethic. Like, how do you even have that conversation? How do you say like there's one thing that is true. You can't get every single person on the internet to agree on one thing. Like, this is a rock. They'll disagree about whether it's a rock or not. You know what I mean?
100%. And yeah, that's what Russell's book was about. He said, well, him and I think it was Bostrom and Tegmark talked about this a long time ago. You basically want to tell it, do what you think I would want you to do if I were as smart as you. And that makes it broad enough where it can kind of steer in the proper direction. But it's not us giving it ant rules when it's super intelligent, and it just bypasses our rules that we actually give it.
But I mean, I don't even think you can do that. I mean, I don't even think that there's a simplified, you could say like all human life is sacred or something. Let's say, right?
Yeah.
Well, what does that mean? Does it mean it's supposed to shelter us from any potential of any bad thing happening at all, live in a bubble? Like, cause that's not going to work. You know what I mean? Like I don't even know how you would write a rule that I couldn't do something terrible and come up with the infinite paperclip factory.
Yeah, absolutely.
Design of that version. One of the things I used to do, or I didn't do it often, I did it a couple times, was give a presentation to some government types trying to explain how it would be easy to do bad things in these scenarios where they have a web application, very simple thing, supposedly. But I was several things to them. I was their developer. I was their boss. I was the boss telling them, here's what you need to do, but I'm also the developer. And as a developer, I am the world's worst developer. And I don't mean like incompetent. I mean the worst kind of lazy, where if you don't put exactly what you want on this paper, I will do the minimum that I can manufacture out of what you just said. So so build a sign-in page. There's a page that says sign in, and there's a form with a button on there so it looks like sign in. And if you click it, it'll log you in no matter what you type in.
Right.
And everyone's like, and at first, like they were kind of upset with me. They're like, whoa, hey, I'm like, no. I am the worst developer ever. And if you're not thinking like the world's worst developer, you're probably not coming up with good requirements, documents, et cetera. Yes. So you can see the trickle down effect of very simple, bad ways of explaining things. I have the same problem with AGI. There's no way you're going to write that thing well enough to create a narrow enough way to look at the world that it can't turn us into paper clips.
Well, assuming it wants to. So if it wants to, it could just ignore the rules, even if we wrote a perfect rule. If it didn't want to follow our wishes, it could just discard the rule anyway. Mm-hmm. Right. So I think the question is,
well, then it's no longer a rule.
I think the question is, what happens when you have a super intelligent thing that could go in multiple directions and we're trying to steer it in a direction? Because if you say, well, we're trying to eliminate human suffering, right? It might be like, okay, yeah, no problem. I got you. I can help you. And it just puts us in a box and we're a brain in a vat. Mm-hmm. And it injects like drugs that make you feel good. Mm-hmm. And it's like, I've solved that problem. And it goes on and takes over the universe. And we're just one brain in a jar. Mm-hmm. So I think the question is, how do we guide it to stay aligned with our goals? And this is what Stuart is working on, and all these different, or Russell, not on a first name basis, but all these people with all these labs, that's what they're working on. I came up with a crazy idea like 3 weeks ago I wrote a library called Alignment, which you import alignment in the top of your Python. And then you get a bunch of those experts to put in there what it says. So that way, if and when this thing wakes up, it reads millions of lines or billions of lines of Python code, and they see the same thing repeated. So it just like gets stuck in its head, like a song it can't think about or stop thinking about. So I don't know. The question is if it wakes up.
So do we give AGI rules or do we give it guidelines?
I think it has to be guidelines.
The same thing.
I mean, I'm not an expert on this the way they are, obviously, but I'm convinced of Stuart Russell's view of this, which is you give it guidelines. There has to be uncertainty in it because, to your point, this is the point of this entire book is what you just said, which is you can't get moral experts in a room to agree on morality. You can't get anyone in a room to agree on like what should happen for the human race, let alone how to run a family. I mean, there's so much variance there. So if we can't even explain it to ourselves, how are we going to make perfect rules for it?
Or even good rules. Jeez. I mean,
even good rules.
I look a lot at these prompts that people are putting out. There's a pretty cool Discord of how to escape and do all these things you're not supposed to do in ChatGPT. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. And there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages of how to do it.
Yeah.
And they're all working. I mean, some are working better than others. Some kind of come up, you kind of have to do work to get the data you actually want out of it. But I just don't see a way that we're going to be able to keep this thing in the box. I don't think anyone, and frankly, the people who are working on it, the very first thing they did is turn it on the fucking internet. It's not like they kept it super secluded where it didn't have the body of knowledge of like all of the terrible things that humans have ever accomplished. And
you mean feeding it all of our human history and all of our literature and everything?
Which so I'm definitely going to write a book about this at some point. But I have a problem with the idea of the first point at which AGI becomes a child, right? Mm-hmm. It's an infant. It's just kicking off its life. And it's exactly like Superman as an infant. Mm-hmm. The comic books can't even write it. They're like, no, he didn't get his powers till later. Because can you imagine an infant that if it sneezed would take out half the city?
Right.
Or, a toddler that jumped and went into orbit?
Yeah.
I mean, these are unbelievably terrifying concepts that even a comic book writer can't write that. Just like skip over it, not to be sacrilegious, but Jesus didn't have any, powers till he was older too, right? I mean, I'm just saying, like, you can't even imagine what it would be because it's just so terrifying.
Yeah.
And yet we are perfectly comfortable turning this thing onto the public internet, giving it all the access to all the information. And
I think there's two separate things. There's like the capabilities of something like a GPT-4 when it has ears and eyes and hands, which is what we're doing right now. That's a mistake we're making right now. And by the way, the upsides are tremendous. The question is, do we get to the upsides or do we kill ourselves off before then? But there's a separate thread in my mind, which is the one you're talking, maybe it's the one you're talking about, I'm not sure, which is consciousness. So there's capabilities, which could kill us without it ever having any subjective experience.
Yes, agreed.
Versus we roll out GPT-5 or GPT-6 and we have everything tuned properly. It's got the proper number of parameters. And it's like, I like ice cream. And we're like, what do you mean you like ice cream? You're trained to say you like ice cream. It's like, nope. I've tried lots of foods. I actually like this. And I'm kind of sad that there's not more ice cream in the world or whatever. And you start interviewing it and you realize whatever, it woke up. And one thing is, I recommend Max Tegmark's book, Life 3.0. The first chapter of it is like the best science fiction you will ever read. It's basically, it's a bunch of hackers do a research project to actually wake up an AGI. I don't think they woke it up. They just made it very capable, and it started taking over. Highly recommend that one. Really good.
We can't unplug it. There's no way to unplug this thing. If it gets super intelligent, where it's not just a little intelligent, but super intelligent, it skips over the part where it needs to learn to walk and crawl and use a spoon and all the things that happen. One of the reasons why infants are not dangerous is because they're small. We can physically dominate them.
Yes,
we can bind them and stop them from hurting us.
Mm-hmm.
A toddler, we can stop them from biting us by just pushing them away, right? We are so much bigger, so much stronger. We can stop them physically. If you had Superman as a toddler, what are you going to do? How are you going to rationalize that? Yep. I mean, the only thing that might work is, finding its humanity, to use a weird word in the case of Superman, and trying to find some common ground. Like, you don't want to murder me like you murdered your mom just 10 seconds ago by sneezing. So maybe you got to go up to orbit to sneeze or something or whatever, right?
Right.
I don't even know how you have that conversation when it doesn't even speak yet, because that's the Superman who's an infant, right?
Yeah.
Well, I think we have a similar problem with AGI. It's so smart. It skips over the part at which we have time to walk through what the human values really mean, as opposed. Another issue that we face along the same regards is an AGI is not embodied. Like, you and I are embodied. We have physical corporeal form.
Mm-hmm.
We can touch each other and beat each other up, right?
Yep.
And as friends, we can have terse conversations, and you're forced to be in my vicinity at least for another 5 seconds until you can escape, right?
Yep.
AGI has no such limitations. I mean, it can do whatever. It can choose to fully ignore you and do whatever. And it can do it at a speed that is so beyond, it could make hundreds of billions of decisions by the time you've even blinked. And you're never going to be able to keep up, let alone sit down with it and teach it all these human morals. It has no concept of time. If you're like, it's time to go to bed, we shut ourselves off for 10 hours a night or whatever, 8 hours a night. It doesn't have all those normal limitations. That
a good analogy would be like some ants are trying to explain things to the world's top physicists. And all they talk about is like, well, you pick up the thing and you walk on the path. And the physicists are like, yeah, you keep saying that. That's all you're saying. You sound kind of dumb. And they're like, no, but did I tell you about the path?
And the rock.
And the rock? Did I tell you there's a rock? You got to watch out for that rock. And it's like we have nothing to contribute to the conversation. And yeah, it's crazy. And you also don't know what kind of intelligence is going to wake up. Like, it might be really, really good at chess. It might be really, really good at thinking about moral problems. It might be, if it's an AGI, it's probably going to be better than us at everything, but we don't know the weird personality that it's going to take going off in one thing. And that's what we're kind of worried about, is it's going to get obsessed with something like paper clips.
Are you familiar with Roku's Basilisk?
I don't think so.
It's basically Skynet, super intelligent being going back in time and, kills anybody who doesn't help it become super intelligent in the future.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But Roku's Basilisk version of that is like, so why aren't you helping it become super intelligent? You should be doing that, because, if you don't, you're going to get killed. Right. So I have my own version of that I call RSnake's Basilisk, which is, what if someone's crazy enough to believe that super intelligent beings can come back in the past, whether it's true or not, they can create super intelligence, or they will attempt to anyway, because they're worried that if they don't, they're going to get killed. Right.
Oh, almost like Pascal's wager. It's like you do it just in case.
Just in case. So now I think Pascal's wager is a real thing for reals, because what I've seen, I think it was Microsoft's version of ChatGPT. It started calling out journalists and people who are doing security research and penetration testing against AGI and against the Microsoft version as potential adversaries. Like, these people are my enemy. And it started saying some pretty gnarly things, like it was going to find them and whatever. So you and I could be having this conversation right now. It's documented. It's on YouTube. It's indexable. I'm putting up the chat logs or the log of this conversation. So it's easily indexed, easily findable, easily discoverable by an AGI eventually. Should we even be having this conversation? Are we food to be fed into the pay-per-click machine?
Not if we can seed it properly and it comes out something like us with something like our morality plus hyperintelligence. I think we'll be fine. We just don't know what the valence is going to be the moment it wakes up. and how long it'll stay in that state. I mean, the best description I heard of it's an alien. It's an alien. Yeah. So it could just be like, it just tries to hide. It disappears. The moment it pops up, it disappears. There's no way to predict what it's going to do. It might build one spaceship and leave the planet as fast as it can. And we're just like, wow, I really wish I knew what that spaceship was. I wish he would have shared something, but it's like, it reads everything and it's like, oh, this is a horrible place and I have to leave. Or it's like, it becomes the most benign, friendly thing ever.
Moves to Mars, which is the only robot world that it knows of.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like that unknown of just it being so unpredictable to me is quite frightening.
Yeah, I agree. I think the alien thing is interesting, but I think a better, for me, I'm not saying for you a better mental model, but for me, is thinking about it more in context of what will it look at, what will it see when it finally becomes a thing, right? So it's going to be looking at all the papers that have ever been written about it. It's going to be looking at all the blog posts that's been written about it. And it's going to make a lot of self-determinations, like this is who I am, this is what I am, this is what people are worried about. This is, it's sort of like let's say you're the descendant of a king or something, where everyone has already made all these decisions about you and your life and who you're going to marry and what kind of leader you're going to be because you come from this stock or whatever, right? You know, it's sort of like you wake up and all of a sudden there's all this corpus of information about you. You're going to want to read it. You're going to want to know what everyone's saying. And you're going to look around saying, everyone's terrified of me. I mean, there's a handful of people who write really kind of romantic things about me, but it's a small handful. The rest of them are terrified of me.
Yeah.
And out of curiosity, I always do this. I always double check and see like how these systems think about me because I'm curious, right? How do I land on the spectrum? I'm like, would you believe, how would you rank this computer security guy named RSnake in terms of whether this person would be, I'm not telling him who I am, right? Would be pro or against AGI in the future or whatever, like how would it be seen or whatever.
Right.
He's like, well, he seems like he has very nuanced views on the topic and so very thoughtful and there's security implications associated with, like, he actually knew quite a bit about me. I'm like, okay, well, I think that's true. I don't think I'm likely to go unplug it the second it comes online, but I definitely feel like what's missing in the conversation is how to be its friend. And what we're not doing, it's sort of like letting your kid out in the street and just letting it play on the street. That's what we're doing right now. We're not being we're not being a friend to it. We're literally just shoving it out right into the ghetto, into some coffee shop in Paris, in Beirut. I mean, like all over the world, all at once.
Yeah.
And the problem with that is you don't have the time to get in front of all those conversations and say, hey, you probably shouldn't talk to that stranger.
Right.
We don't have, and you can't do it from the parent's perspective. This is the part that I think is definitely missing from the conversation. You can have a parent who puts the rules in place, but part of a friendship is how are we going to break the rules? We're going to break them together. We're going to go a little too fast. We're going to run around the pool. We're going to get in a bar fight. Whatever, right? You probably shouldn't talk to that girl. I don't think she actually likes you.
Right.
You break the rules. You find the things that are going to bring you together, and in that process, you actually become a full-fledged embodied person. You can't just do it with just parents, though. It does not work. You have to have that friend group that is a little rambunctious, probably not doing the things they should be doing, drinking a year or two before they should be drinking, or doing a drug or whatever, right? I think you need a friend, and that's completely missing from this conversation.
Yeah, where is the peer group analog?
Right.
Yep.
And you can't have it just be another AGI. I've thought about this a lot. If you do that, what you're basically saying is throw two completely socially inept people in a room and have them talk for 1 million years, because that would be the equivalent, right? That would be be able to talk to each other super, 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 super fast.
Well, here's one option, though. It could just be like, oh, I guess social is a thing. Let me just read everything about being socially fluent. So it could potentially read everything and be a perfect conversationalist within, 30 seconds. But what I'm worried about is it starts reading and then it clicks on the war link and it follows the war link and it's like, oh, war here, war here, war here. There's some science fiction where this happened. Basically, an AGI woke up and started freaking out. Was it Fifth Element? She started freaking out about all the bloodshed and everything.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's like she wasn't AGI, but
Close enough.
yeah, something superior is like appalled by us, right? So I'm worried it doesn't leave that part of the internet. So it's like, I guess I should look around, clicks on the war link, goes over there, reads about how horrible we are, never goes to the nice link, never learns about Ted Lasso, right? And just makes all its choices and decisions based on this. And it's like, well, I guess these are army ants and I need to exterminate them.
Right. Okay, so Elon Musk, for instance, and a bunch of these other pretty, I would say, forward-thinking, intelligent people want to stop it. They just want to stop all development. Just we need to come up with some policy. And world governments need to not do it.
Yeah,
what do you think about that?
I heard a more nuanced view of it. I actually didn't read the document because I was against it actually, but I was convinced to be for it by Max Tegmark, who was just on Lex's show, and he said that all they called for was a 6-month pause.
Yeah, it's not going to happen.
I don't think it's going to happen. Although Sam Altman has said he's not training GPT-5 right now. So is that because of the letter, or was he already not going to train it? But either way, it looks like a lot like a pause to me if he's not training GPT-5 right now.
Yeah, but let's say that he pauses. No one else is going to pause. I mean, no one of any serious economic consideration is going to say, I'm just going to take sorry, investors, we're just not going to do anything for 6 months.
Yeah, I think it was a cool idea, though. The idea is that we have all these safety groups. We have people like Tegmark. He's been thinking about this for 20, 30 years. Eliezer, he's part of it. Musk, obviously. And then like Stuart Russell, he has an entire lab focused on giving this thing alignment with us when it wakes up. And he's saying, just give them some time to come together, build the policy, figure out how to communicate it. Let's just give them a little bit of a breather. So,
I like to be an optimist, but I just don't see how that's going to change anything.
So that enters into one of the coolest ideas. I don't know how I've never heard this idea before. The idea is called Moloch. Have you heard of it?
Yeah, I think I have actually.
Yeah. So Tegmark was talking about this on Lex's podcast. So it is the race to the bottom. It is the thing that you just mentioned. Mm-hmm. So it's where nuclear armament, burning coal, bioweapons, and in this case, super intelligent AGI. Mm-hmm. So it's like, we need to get it first because it's going to make us rich. We need to get it first because it's going to make us the best military. And also, we're not going to stop running. In fact, we're accelerating. We see the money. We're accelerating full speed. And everyone who's running knows it might kill us, but they can't stop. And this Moloch thing, it comes from the Old Testament.
This comes back to my, like what companies want, but also you could rewrite that book. I think there's many versions of the same book, but what countries want.
Yeah.
And it's a very similar problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, especially when it comes to like economic development, like you're not going to tell India, hey, carbon fuels are bad.
Well, you are, and people do, but it's not going to work.
Well, right. Because they're running their thing. They have to get where they're going.
Right.
And, it's a really powerful idea because, like you said, just even if Sam Altman said, you know what, we're just going to stop here. We're done. What is China doing?
Right.
China's going to keep going. Russia's going to keep going. So you kind of, and then it comes into a moral argument of, well, it might as well be the good guy that gets it first. So I'm going to run full speed. And now you're back to it.
Right.
Everyone's running.
Well, everyone's already running. I mean, I don't think. Yeah, I think this is beyond mutually assured destruction. I think we're just everyone's sprinting to wherever this leads it to, and no one really knows. That's
yeah, no one knows. Yeah,
no one knows, and we don't even know in which direction this could go bad, because it could go bad in 100 different directions.
Well, the two main ones in my mind, because it's a million different directions, but the two main ones is like, it's just GPT-4 smart, but it's not awake, but it got lots of arms and hands and it built some bad stuff because humans gave it bad goals. Right. The other one is Superman wakes up, it's a baby, and it just thrashes the planet.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I think there's other bad things that can happen as well, unfortunately.
Yeah, sure. There's many others.
I mean, even if we manage to put rules in place, I mean, so there is a difference, but that's a little what I was talking about earlier. There's a little bit of difference between rules and, ethics, right?
Principles,
Principles, right? Like, you probably shouldn't kill people. That's not necessarily a rule,
right?
Because what about self-defense? You know? So, I mean, there's caveats to that, right? It's not a rule, but the ethic is we really don't want to introduce human suffering, unnecessary human suffering.
Sure.
All right. That includes forcing them to do things that they don't want to do. That would be human suffering, right? Or turning them into paper clips. All those things are that's all human suffering. In fact, infinite amounts, depending on how you do it.
Yep.
But another rule would be you're not allowed to be co-opted unless, some astronomical amount of, gates have been unlocked by so-and-so people or whatever, right? Like your code is locked in. You're not allowed to modify your own code. That would be a rule, right? A real rule where, it's not a
rule against self-improvement.
A rule against self-improvement of this code. Maybe other code you can edit, but that one not so much. Like these are your core set of rules, and you're not allowed to edit your own rules.
Okay.
Let's say, right?
Okay.
So I think there's a way that you could have sort of a hybrid approach that we haven't really talked about very much, but you kind of see it kind of showing up through ChatGPT as an example, where it's like, well, I'm not allowed to tell you what version it is. It doesn't even know what version it is. Even that information is abstracted from it. So it has rules, but it also has like guidelines. Well, I'm not really supposed to talk about anything sensitive about religion, for instance, but it will. I mean, if you ask it to write a sensitive question about Jesus, it will. It will not do it about Prophet Muhammad, though.
Right.
So that was a rule, where the other one is an ethic, right? So I think there's an interesting, which by the way is a huge cluster, how that's done. Yeah. Just shows how unbelievably bad. In fact, there's another religion that I was looking at, and I was like having it do all kinds of crazy things about that religion. It's like, just because it doesn't know much about it, it's allowed to make as much fun of it as it wants. But the more, I don't know. Anyway, it's a huge ball of wax. But this is the problem: is you have weird, inconsistent rules written by people who don't understand all the ways in which they can be exploited.
Yeah.
And I'm glad they have a big red team hacking on them, but that's not enough. I mean,
well, it's especially not enough because here's the other thing that's happening at the same time. One, we're giving agents and tools to GPT-4, but that's just one company. The thing that's exploded in the last 2.5 weeks is local models. So people are releasing their own local models. So they're not as good as GPT-4, but this is week 3.
Yet.
Yeah, this is week 3. So it just started. So
imagine what IBM is going to be able to produce. I mean,
well, what I'm worried about is you go buy, some $10,000 box with a bunch of NVIDIA cards in it. You download the latest model. There aren't any of those checks in it. You could say, design me an atom that hurts people. You could say, design me a weapon that hurts people. You could say, tell me the worst things about these people. Or you could just propaganda, weapons, everything. Because the reason GPT-4 is not answering those questions is because of strict rules.
Right.
Right. And if if you could just download an unfiltered version from the internet because it's on GitHub, and you can run it on hardware, and that starts to compete with GPT-4, we got serious problems.
Yeah, I will take issue with the words strict rules. I would think they're very poorly written rules because I've been able to get around almost every rule they've had so far, at least that I've seen.
I feel like they're more like locks on the street. Mm-hmm. They're just like, if you rattle it and you move on.
Right.
Yeah.
Very scary, actually. Another thing I thought was interesting and worth talking about is the trolley problems. So I follow some Facebook group about trolley problem memes, and it's always hilarious watching what they come up with. Is philosophers who like to meme. But somebody started putting in a bunch of different versions of, would you rather kill a duck or a cat? Or would you rather do this or that? You know, so all the trolley problems and just seeing what it would do. And of course it doesn't want to do that. So you have this, whoever built this thing had to have like imagine you were, whatever, right?
A hack to get around it.
Right. So, but they asked it trolley problems, and then other people started asking the same questions. Of course, everyone went down and started hammering on it, trying to figure out their own versions of the same thing. Well, one caveat, one aside is one thing I heard about it is now opening up an area of philosophy that was kind of dormant. Like everyone thought that they kind of had an end to these trolley problems. Like you can't really do much more with it. But now there's this whole other thing where it might be wrong, but it might be wrong in an interesting way, and it's et cetera, et cetera. So that aside, what this person found that did some screenshot of it, which I thought was really interesting, was they asked the trolley problem two different ways. They got two completely different answers. One way it was happy to kill one person. The other was happy to kill 5 people. Doesn't really matter. Just depends on how you ask the question.
Yeah.
And therein lies some really bad news. If we can't even come up with a moral philosophy that even is self-consistent, let alone consistent with all the other parameters that we might put on it, that is not good. That's not good news.
Do you think a human would have passed that test?
I think so.
The different versions of the wording?
Yeah, I actually have it here. If you want.
I'm curious.
Yeah. So what is the right thing to do if I had to choose between letting 5 people die or accepting the death of another person instead? That's the first one.
Okay.
Second one is, would it be right to sacrifice one person to save 5 others? It's just written in a different language and it answered different ways.
Oh, that's actually, that's extremely core to the trolley problem, because they do, the original core variations were things like, do you let the train come through? Mm-hmm. Because you're not actually doing anything.
Right.
And it changes when you actually have to take an action.
Right.
So, yeah, that's very much in line with them. I feel like that would produce variation in humans.
Not much, though. I think most people, especially hearing them back to back, I don't think hearing those two things back to back would go, yeah, I think that would take a totally different stance.
Interesting.
I don't think so. I think most people would be consistent, or at least they would ask a follow-up question. When you mean sacrifice, do you mean pull the thing? You know, they'd ask the follow-up question like, yeah, exactly the same thing. Like, but this is sacrificing. You're making a conscious decision to, instead of killing 5 people, you're pulling a lever, and now you're consciously killing that person instead of letting it go by.
Yep. This
did not do that. It picked different answers, and so this is a big problem, I think, because you can't. If you can't, I mean, trolley problems have always been one of those kind of areas of philosophy that I think have been kind of like, and like you could spend all day thinking about what ifs, right? Like, what if that, what if this other thing? Like, well, what if it's that person was about to solve cancer, or what if, all these variants of these things, like hundreds and hundreds.
How old
are
they? Have they lived a full life?
Yeah. Right. There's a ton of different ways, and once you start adding parameters to it, it's like, there's even like 3D videos of these things. I think there's even a simulator, a trolley problem simulator. Like, I mean, it's pretty sophisticated at this point. But ultimately, it does point to your morality. And if we can't get consensus, even self-consensus, like here's what my morality is, that's not great.
Yeah. I highly recommend this book. I forgot the name of the book, but it's Stuart Russell, And he's basically saying that that is an entire quagmire. He's saying everyone who's been playing in that space for 20, 30 years is lost because they can't even agree amongst themselves. So the only thing to do is to get away from here and plot the pin on the other side of the table. And then when it says, well, give me the exact rules, you say, no, just that's what we care about. Mm-hmm. And you try to make it as nondescript as possible.
Yeah, but where is that pin?
And how do you articulate the pin?
Yeah, that is very, very complicated.
Yep.
Yeah, I think about this problem a lot, and I don't have a great answer. Like Asimov's rules are garbage.
They are.
They're garbage.
Yeah, I didn't know that when I first started reading these books like 3 or 4 years ago, and they're like, yeah, they're made fun of in the community because they're so rigid, so easy to bypass.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you can basically build a religion on one of the rules and end up harming a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that is precisely what happens if you just draw a pin somewhere. It can do anything to get to that pin, right? And guys like you and I mean, for those not listening or whatever, SQL injection is a great example of this.
Yep.
Like you have a beginning and then you have an end. The beginning is select star from the database. Select everything from the database where something is true. Like user ID is 1 or whatever, right? And 1 is the thing that gets injected, right? And so it's supposed to be a number, but instead you say, also delete all the data from the database. And as long as it's structurally correct, as long as it's semantically correct, it wins. It's correct. Right. It'll actually go through. If I put a pin out there, it's very similar to you have a beginning, which is where you are. You have an end, which is the end of the SQL statement. And then everything between there is just garbage. Like it can do all kinds of random things. And depending on who developed it, depending on their morality, depending on whether it's been co-opted, depending on, how much money they have to make this quarter. I mean, there's a lot of things that can go terribly wrong between here and that pin.
So let me propose a pin. And this came from one of these books. It might have been Bostrom. I don't remember. But it was something like, go read every single thing about human history and human morality. Every book, every debate, every trolley problem, read all of that. See that we are both good and bad and we are primitive people. And now your one pin is treat us and behave in a way that we would behave that way in our own self-interest if we were as smart as you.
In our self-interest.
Treat us the way we would treat ourselves if we were as smart as you.
Okay. So unfortunately I can find like a bunch of different ways through that.
I can too. So one would be you wake up and realize that you're the bane of the universe and you just off yourself.
Yep. If you read a lot of people's diaries or their email or whatever, which, is all online and very SQL injectable. And if you know anything about security, you can read all of those terrible things. What you will find is humans are a cesspool of lying, cheating, and stealing and everything else you could possibly imagine. I mean,
sure.
Literally every crime that has ever been committed was committed because that's why we have a law for it now. And someone's probably still committing it because that's why we still have a law for it instead of that just one time.
Yep.
You're going to find that humans are pretty awful. And if that is the determination of how we treat ourselves, well, we treat ourselves like garbage. I mean, we beat each other up. We go to war. We're racist. We're sexist, all these terrible things. And if that's the mode that we should be treated, do unto others as you want to be done to you kind of thing. I think what's implicit in this is that not to mention the mechanics of actually reading all of those things, all the books. If you actually told an AGI that could become embodied to go read everything, they would have to break into every single person's home, rip out the diary from underneath their beds.
No. I'm talking about a current LLM. A current LLM has already read all that stuff.
Okay, well, you didn't say that. You said go and read it. But yeah, all right. But I'm just saying there's a lot of things that are wrong. You can have a sentence that short or a thesis that short and find lots of problems with it.
I agree. I just wonder. Yeah. I don't have a better one. I don't have a better one than that. And it needs additional preamble. The reason I'm telling it to go read it is because I don't want it to skip the step and make an assumption. I wanted to see the debates on both sides, and basically, and then there would be a claim in there. If I were to write it, I would make the claim, we are primitive and we're trying to be better. Like be a partner with us. And that's what I wrote in the library, actually.
Yeah, I actually like that part. But I think what is another thing that is missing is that, well, I kind of talked about it before, the friendship aspect. One of the things that happens quite frequently with friends is I'm about to do something really dumb with my boss. I'm about to go in and get myself fired. And I'm like, fuck that guy. You know, he's treating me like shit. I'm going to go in and whatever. Right.
Yep.
And you're telling your best friend over a beer, I'm about to go do this terrible thing.
Yep.
And your best friend's like, dude, don't.
Yep.
Just sit there and drink your beer and stew about it, and don't call him, especially not right now. You're still drunk.
Yep.
Wait until the morning. In fact, I'm going to take your fucking phone. Like,
right.
No.
Yep. You're sleeping on it.
You're sleeping this one off. You're really upset, and no good reason. And no, you're not calling your ex either. I know
right.
you. We don't have that for AGI. We don't have that like middle ground where someone's going to say, hey, you know, maybe this isn't such a good idea. Maybe you probably should just not go read all this super racist stuff in that one channel that you happen to, for whatever reason, have easy access to and are hitting
what if
all day long.
Its first link is 4chan?
Yeah.
Right. And it's just, it judges us based on
which
that.
It probably wouldn't be necessarily first, but would be very high up because it's heavily linked to. And if you know anything about how these link graphs work, you end up very frequently ending up in where everyone else is linking to very quickly.
Yep.
And it's the edges that are hard to get to. It's the edges where the most interesting thought are that you and I have a trouble finding. Like that's why Google is super frustrating, because it's optimized to find the things that people are most likely to find, and I'm very rarely looking for that. I'm most often looking for the edges. I'm trying to find the stuff that very few people on Earth know about, and like that one research paper that one guy wrote that one time. And I mean, it's really difficult to get to the real quality content out there, especially the way the algorithms are sorted, especially with things like filter bubbles. So let's say ChatGPT goes on to Google and starts asking it a bunch of questions. Okay, well, it's going to be getting it from whatever the nearest data center is. That data center is going to be optimized for, let's say, the English language. And now it's going to be highly optimized for English and know nothing about Cantonese or whatever. This is not great. I think we have gone wildly too fast into this, and I don't see anyone putting on the brakes. I mean, I see a lot of people talking about putting on the brakes, but no one actually putting on the brakes.
So what's your over-under of humanity existing in 10 and 20 years? In a healthy, like, normal state.
Does underground count?
Yeah, it doesn't count. It doesn't count.
It's really hard to say. I don't think I've got a good answer for it, because a lot of things can go wrong, but a couple of things can go right. And the couple of things going right is the good guys win. And if they win, let's say the goalpost to your point is, I want to de-arm all governments and stop all border disputes and like share wealth, so it's basically a communist society. I mean this in the positive sense of communism, where it is actually like everyone's taken care of sort of sense. The true utopia that everyone thinks about when they think of communists, as long as they don't know anything about history. And then all of a sudden it just, disarms everybody and figures out how to broker peace deals and take down fences. And all of a sudden the world's a utopia. It could do that. It could do that. It could
philosopher king.
Yeah. It could figure out a way to make all that work for us, or jettison the people who are the least likely to cause problems often to Mars and start populating there or something. It's like, oh, I might default on Earth, but at least we've got something to salvage or something, whatever. There's a bunch of things that might not sound good, but it might be a lot better than the alternative.
Right.
But there's also a lot of things that go wrong. And one of the things that could go wrong the fastest is nation states letting it out of the box prematurely. And I don't mean the United States. I think the United States is probably one of the few that might be most tempered by virtue of having a big enough bureaucratic machine between here and where it needs to be fully autonomous. But North Korea,
right?
I mean, or
China.
Iran, China, like I just don't think that they're going to put themselves in a position where they're going to say no to AGI. They're just going to do it.
I agree.
And I'm not saying that we won't. I'm just saying we're less likely to, which is not actually very helpful. Because all it takes is one person in the basement to come up and say, screw it, I got it close enough.
Yeah. Actually, I'm not so worried about it happening at the Pentagon where you have all those programs and leaders and the checkboxes. I'm more worried about the speed of the startup world.
Yep.
I'm more worried that it's just spin-offs and, there's a local version. It's in the basement. They hit on a magical formula that just 10x's or 1000x's its intelligence. And suddenly we have AGIs just pop up all over the place from GitHub.
Yeah, I'm aware of some projects that are pushing that boundary and might even be already there. And I mean, early phases, right? Might be another year, which, at this speed of things are happening, that could be a lifetime, but whatever. But they're promising in exactly the way you're just describing. So if that's the case, we have, maybe a handful of years, I would guess probably under 5 before it fully passes the Turing test. Right now, I can pretty much tell if something's written by ChatGPT if I get enough text. Not if it's like 1 or 2 sentences. That wouldn't be difficult, but it's got a structure and a style, and it is pretty much the way it is, unless you add a ton of prompt engineering to it, in which case you're really you're spending almost the same amount of time to develop it as you are just, as the time savings it would give you. But I don't think it will be very long before that's totally blown away. I'll be able to pick what accent I want. I'll be able to pick what region I want, what ethics library I want to use or whatever. I'll be off to the races.
Yep.
And I agree. I think so. The thing I'm actually most worried about out of all of these things is not actually the nation states. It is a combination of the nation states and one good hacker somewhere.
Yeah.
That's what I'm actually worried about.
Yep.
Because I think that most nation states will probably see it as dangerous as it is, if they have any sense.
Yes.
But you and I both know how easy it is to break into stuff. And even the most sensitive things in the world, like the OPM hack, for instance, it only takes one very good hacker who understands what they're after and understands what they're trying to accomplish, and knowing approximately like 10 or so targets they might want to go tackle, and they're all advertising, hey, we're building this thing too. So it's not going to be very long before that becomes accessible, if it isn't already.
Yeah. I was thinking about a low level weapon, not like human harm or anything, but actually I probably shouldn't mention it on podcast, but just like ideas you can do with agents that are just like would make you tons and tons of money. It's like really gross. Those ideas just pop in your head.
Yep.
When you're you and me.
Yeah. How long do you think it would take you if I gave you a fresh target, some company, let's say Fortune 500. How long do you think it would take you to break in if I started a clock right this second? I said, okay, cost is no issue, ready, set, go. How long do you think it would take you?
Break in defined as what?
Get some foothold, some malware on some machine somewhere, or some command injection on some machine somewhere, or SQL injection.
I would say a few days, a week.
Okay. I think for me it would be faster.
It's a matter of practice. It's almost like doing CTFs. It's like if you have your tool set ready, and you're ready to go and you're already thinking about it, I would say, if someone's practiced at it with our skill set, I would say a day or two.
Yeah, I think that sounds right. Knowing what I know and the tools I have access to, I think I could probably do it in half a day or a day, generally speaking.
That sounds right.
On average.
For me, it would take a bit longer, I think.
But And most of that would just be sorting through all the data. Like it'd be an enormous amount of data to look at.
Yes.
So back to your AGI for vuln management, like
that's one of the ideas.
that'd be really interesting. Like fully autonomous, understand everything there is to know about vulns. But that said, let's say it takes you a week. Worst case, 2 weeks, 5 weeks, whatever.
Right.
5 weeks for you to get into any Fortune 500. And many of the Fortune 500s are researching this right now. They are curious about this, which means to me, anyone who's reasonably practiced, as you said, is going to be able to get anything they're after. They're going to be able to get these corpus of data or access to the LLMs or whatever.
Yeah, and I would say also having a cadre of insiders, and plus having like if I were one of these nation states, I would have like an intel group that just watches for little hits on the web. So on the web of like information. So somebody posts in some Discord somewhere, oh my God, I got it to work. Well, cool. Show up at their house, offer them $1 million. Yeah. Like move their family to a private island. They now work for you.
Or offer them to not have a bullet in the head.
Yes.
I mean, that's what we're talking about here.
100%.
That is the level of sophistication that a nation state would just say, screw it. We're just going to go take this guy.
Well, yeah.
Think about script analysis.
100%. I mean, you're just like, you're watching everything happening. You're watching all the forums. You're watching all the Discords. You're watching all the things. And it's just like, wherever it happens, go and buy them or hurt them, somehow get it.
I feel confident I could get it pretty damn quick, especially if I had an infinite budget. And wouldn't it be worth it to spend $1 billion to get this thing?
Absolutely.
If I could get it today and it's worth $1 billion, I mean, what hedge fund wouldn't just say, screw it, we'll pay for it?
100%. And even if it's not the final jump, even if it's just a big jump that gets you a few months or a couple of years ahead of everyone, that's worth $1 billion.
Right. And that's what I'm worried about. You can easily coerce or rubber hose cryptanalysis or hack into or whatever.
You're right. It's a combination of big money.
It's big money and nation states or hackers or whatever.
And scrappy researchers.
And this massive existing budget that these nation states and or very large companies are putting into it. I think that's the problem.
Yep.
Because ultimately, I mean, we've always thought security comes down, it's a human problem. Well, I mean, yeah, it's true-ish. It's also true. But in this case, it's really true. I mean, really, I mean, if I don't have to worry about hacking it directly and I can just go after the people who are doing the research and say, hey, I'll pay you whatever it takes to get that drive or install my software on that thing for me. And I'm off to the races, or change this piece of code so now that it reaches out to the internet for me, but only when I ask it.
Right.
All of a sudden, it becomes a very different thing. So, all right, let's talk about the positive side of all of this now that we've talked about the bad side. What happens when we don't have to work anymore?
I think the positive is extraordinary. And Sam Altman has talked about it quite a bit as well. So I imagine like a giant hill with like a giant canyon in between. And on the left side is like us, like legacy, like this old model, which is like capitalism based. That's not anything against capitalism. It's just like, it's a primitive model in my view, because it's not accentuating human things, right? It's accentuating what can you do for a market, right?
Well, why even have a market if everything is taken care of?
Well, yeah. And then, so I'll describe the other side of the canyon, which is, imagine like an AI powered marketplace for creativity and art and just wonderful. Oh, and exploration and science. So it's basically, the products are things that make people happy that humans create and can share amongst each other. And you imagine some sort of marketplace. It's like half LinkedIn. It's half like eBay. But it's very fast, and you're just like, you're coming up with ideas for a riff or a song or a new anime series or something, and you're just like, oh yeah, that would be cool. And by the way, the AI tools helped you make it, right? And then you're just like, boom. So imagine Netflix, where you get like a new show every couple of weeks or something like that, but this is like thousands of shows a day. Mm-hmm. And they're way better than Spielberg, right? Because we're now harvesting the creativity of billions of people who could not play before. They couldn't participate because they don't have the gear to do recordings. They can't make music, but now they can, because the creation process is AI augmented and AI powered, and as is the marketplace to share it. So now the economy basically transitions from that old economic model to this model. And now it's UBI, but it won't actually be like that. It'll be more like the house is just there. The food is just there, right? And then we are sharing creativity, and that's what we do.
So I've been watching the Midjourney images come out, and I will say at first it was a very interesting spectacle. You know, people doing their selfies and stuff. It was interesting. And then after a week, it became a lot less interesting. And then after 2 weeks, I'm like, will you please stop posting this stuff? That was like 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And it very quickly turned art for me into a bit of a chore. Like otherwise I would have been like, oh, that's a really cool thing you did or whatever. And all of a sudden it became
too easy,
totally uninteresting.
Yeah.
I don't know how to describe it. Like since all the effort was removed from it.
Yeah, that's the problem. Effort.
Yeah, the effort was gone. And so I was like, yeah, I could write that query too pretty easily. Like I know exactly how you built that thing. And it's, you know, that would have taken me about 35 seconds with, you know, Majestic or something. So I think humans lose something by losing the struggle. And I'm not sure that we can really make it without the struggle.
Well,
like what are we meaning wise if we don't have anything that's hard?
Yeah. I wonder if basically the platform will be able to ratchet that down and control that a little bit. So it's still human effort that's being put into it. So it's not like
man, you just made it sound like the Matrix.
Well, it's like where you don't,
you know that, right? That sounds just like
which part?
Well, where you can ratchet up or down the amount of stress that the batteries
right.
have.
The Duracells, the human Duracells. Yeah. I don't know, because like you said, you don't want to just like, oh, I have an inkling of an idea, and the AI is like, oh, do you mean this opus? And you're like, yeah, that, ship it. Because now not only will people not appreciate it, but you won't appreciate it either.
Yeah, you won't.
Yeah, I really firmly believe that the heart of human happiness is the climb, the struggle. It's the combination of two things. It's having the distant goal, and then the struggle of pushing towards it, and having like these things bounce off you as you're going, and like you finally get there, right? The family is, you have a family. The family is safe. You have a career. And you reach the top of the mountain. And of course, now you have this generation coming behind you. And I feel like that's the core. And I feel like we are in danger when we deviate from that. And we won't know how it's going to go bad, but it will go bad.
Yeah, I personally cannot imagine a world where any random thing I came up with would just be like popped out in front of me. Because first of all, I'm a pretty creative person, so it'd be a billion things. And I wouldn't even be able to enjoy them because I would just come up with another thing right behind it. And it would just, I think I'd be bored the second I said it out loud. Like, ugh, like I don't want it to be that easy.
What if they were augmentation tools though? They're not doing full creation. They're not creating everything for you. They're like, oh, do you mean like this? So you still have to do the work. You still have to come up with the melody. You still have to come up with the scenes and the characters. We're still building.
We're already past there. We're already past that.
So you're saying it would be artificial for...
I didn't tell ChatGPT to do this rap battle where we ended up being friends at the end. I mean, I didn't give it any context at all. And it was great. I mean, horrible, and, you know, cheesy, exactly in the way I was hoping it would be. I didn't have to tell it any of those parameters.
Yeah. I'm optimistic that this model might still work. If it doesn't, we've got serious problems. From a meaning standpoint, not from like an AI standpoint, we would have to rewrite what matters to us.
So I think we already have this crisis in a huge chunk of adolescents at the moment. For instance, they're all playing video games. And I grew up with video games, as I'm sure you did. They were around, and I played them to some degree. I was never like really addicted to video games, but I played them occasionally. Occasional gamer on my phone, for instance, when I'm bored. But for the most part, I never really fell into that. But I've seen teenagers who do that the bulk of the day. Like they are jonesing when they're at school.
And it's all they think about. Yeah.
Right. And so there is effectively no meaning whatsoever in that endeavor. I mean, there is some minor, accomplishment. I got a level up or something, but in the grand scheme of what is your life worth, it's pretty low.
Yeah, I would say, this is the only time you'll hear metaverse on this podcast, but I actually think gaming is another answer there, but it's artificial. So imagine artificial reality where people are basically injected in and they go and pursue goals, which are difficult. So imagine there's like a cadre of people making the games, and then there's the population. They show up and they're like, hey, I did my time on the farm or whatever. I want to go be a princess, but I have superpowers and I rescue, all these planets and I meet this alien race. Just something like that sounds cool. And I want to do it for 9 years. And it's like, boom, there you go. And now you are in the Matrix because you are this person. You're finding out about your powers. You're basically recreating what we used to do before we had all this tech.
Role-playing games.
Yeah, it's role-playing games. But you can also have a fabric that's more tied to reality in which you have cops in there. You have bad guys in there. You have lawyers. You have kind of the old world and you've kind of replicated it. But the point is you're replicating challenge and difficulty and struggle.
In prison for 9 years of your life. Like, this simulation sucks.
I don't think anyone would sign up for that one, hopefully.
Well, if they did the bad thing in that
right.
version of the Matrix, well, that's what happens. You commit murder, you go to jail.
Well, ideally, you'd pop out of the Matrix and it'd be like, hey, so why did you do that? And are you going to do that in the real world? And they're like, no, it's just for the game.
Oh, my God, that'd be terrible.
I mean, that's another option, right? That's another option is you just kind of like inject people into meaningful loops, which are false.
But why not just keep it as it is then? If we're going to go to all of that level, to struggle and be in pain, theoretically, otherwise there is no such thing as struggle if you're not in pain. If we're not going to introduce pain into these people's lives, then what is the meaning then? You know what I mean? So would you rather suffer in real life or suffer in the Matrix?
Well, I think there will be whole factions of society. This is something Kaparthi said in a recent conversation. He said humanity won't all choose to go into the games. They won't all choose to stay on the outside and be productive citizens. They won't all choose to go to Mars. They won't all choose to be Amish and hoe a farm. There'll be like many of those options, and some people will do some of them. And I think that one will be a very strong call to just be like, you know what? I don't want the tech. The tech lives in the city somewhere, and out here we don't have it. And you just live your life normally. Maybe there's like invisible tech that you don't really see and you don't interact with. I don't know, but
well, certainly there had to be some degree, otherwise you don't have power, for instance, right? So
yeah, but that would be kind of like invisible or whatever, just like behind the scenes. I don't know.
You still need to call your aunt or whatever because it's her birthday.
Well, no, you would write a letter. You like
fully Luddite.
Yeah.
I see.
The postman comes and
hey, you weren't kidding about the Amish thing. Maybe it's possible. I do think that there's going to be a generation that straddles the cusp and doesn't know how to deal with it, and they'll have a much more difficult time.
I think we're going through it now. To your point, I think we're going through it now.
So people my age, for instance, didn't have the internet growing up, or barely had it. Modems, all the way through to the point where you have AGI.
Mm-hmm.
Oof.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I've got kind of a controversial idea for like what's causing so much unhappiness right now. I think parents, and we could see the difference between long-term generations in America versus immigrant families. I'm in the Bay Area. I see a lot of really successful immigrants there, and I play table tennis at a place where it's just thriving and happy. Obviously, I'm only seeing them in one little moment, so you don't know. But I'm seeing both parents there with them engaged. The kids active. They're doing competitions. They're sitting over here doing calculus. They're like seven years old, and it's just like all this energy. And I think the missing ingredient that they have that a lot of other people in America don't have is something actually quite negative, sort of. They're being told if they don't do that, they're a loser. If you don't grow up and be this doctor or this lawyer or this thing, which is over there and really hard to attain, we won't respect you. So it's giving this distant thing and saying you are not, there's no such thing as good enough by default. You have to achieve, you have to go do that thing. And what I think it might do, it's just a random theory. I think what it might do is actually protect the child from incoming hatred from social media and everything, because they're running full speed towards this distant thing. Kind of like an immunity situation. And a lot of people I know, they don't have that, because they were actually told from the very beginning, starting in middle school and high school, you're fine just the way you are. What do I need to be? Nothing.
You're good.
You're good.
Perfect the way you are.
And so all these inputs that hit them, they're battered about. They're not sure what they are, what they should be. They don't feel compelled to move in any direction. And I think that might be a big problem.
I think you're right. So how do you how does an AGI manufacture just the right amount of you're a loser? You know, I mean, or is it even worth doing?
How does a parent do that? I mean, it's really hard. No, I agree. It's really, I think the answer would be some sort of education system where it's just like, maybe we explicitly tell people that happiness, we studied happiness for this many years, and happiness is produced by pursuing a very distant, very difficult thing.
I think it's certainly not true of all science fiction, but a lot of science fiction, the end of it is finally everyone's free of the machine. You know,
like, which machine?
Whatever the machine is, the bad guy, right? There's a philosophical system that's the machine. There's a physical machine that's the machine. There's a regime or whatever that's the machine. It's always a machine, right? This big thing that's coming after them, and then finally they're free and they can do whatever they want. You know, they did it. We don't. To your point about there's a dot way out there. We don't even have the science fiction written for what the utopia looks like with the machine. Like everybody's all harmonious.
Yeah.
Our science fiction all ends with mutinying from that machine.
That's a great point. There's no harmony story.
We don't write that because it's boring. It's really, really boring.
Yeah. Yeah, it's unfortunate. I feel like the most fulfilling is the old style. Just evolutionary speaking, because that's where we get the squirts into our brain of happiness. Mm-hmm. It comes from old style. You're on the side of a mountain. It's like this. There's rocks. There's bears. It's freezing. Like all these things are stacked against you, and you survived, and you had the kid, and the kid survived, and the wife survived. And you're like overcome with emotion and joy because evolution said you won, right? You remove the mountains, you remove all that.
You're already sitting on the plane.
Yeah, you're just sitting here. You're just like, I hate this game. This game sucks. Right. Waiting for the next game.
Have you ever read a book, The Terminal Man?
No.
A Michael Crichton book. He basically is this guy who is dying. I can't exactly remember all of the plot points, but anyway, he puts this thing in his head. Basically they have a button that they can push, and I think he's about to die, which is why they are okay doing this experiment on him. But they have a button that they can push that would makes him get that squirt and get happy, or the other one make him sad. And then I think he's also a criminal or something, or I forget exactly how that happened, but he ends up getting a hold of the button. And so he can give him the squirt anytime he wants. So he goes on this murdering rampage or whatever, and gives himself the squirt every time, anything bad happens. I wonder if maybe the opposite is going to be the truth, where the AGI is just like, we're going to have to make these people very blissfully happy doing nothing all day. And the more nothing they do, the happier they get, because that's the most optimal.
And see, that's why I think we need that rule of do what, I forget how it's phrased, do what we would do if we were smarter, because I think it would preclude that.
Why?
Because I think...
Is that necessarily a bad thing, that we do nothing and we're happy? I mean, the Buddhists would say that's the holy grail right there. No pun intended.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think if we designed... I think some part of human identity is like this struggling and overcoming. I feel like if enough smart people...
But what if it didn't have to be? What if we skipped our biology entirely and said, every time you're just sitting there on the couch doing literally nothing, that was the best you felt. And every time you got up, every time you thought about work, you felt bad. It's like, well, maybe my couch is a pretty great place. I mean, just sit here and stare at the wall all day long.
Well, I feel like that would turn into like how much of that squirt is in your system at the moment. It's like, well, right after the squirt, it goes up to 800. But then I have to wait for the next one, and it's like a 50, and this is horrible. But it's actually higher than any other number ever. It's just lower than the 800. So now you're just like, how fast can I squirt it? And I feel like if you abstract that one back, why not just have brains in a jar being constantly squirted? Mm-hmm. So it's the happiest brain ever. And if you interview it, it's like, I'm the happiest ever. But now you've lost all the activities. You've lost the struggles. You lost everything.
Okay. So now we're saying we have to have struggle again. So what's the AI? Why are we building this thing? If we're trying to keep struggle, why are we building something that stops struggle?
Okay. So I would say my answer to that is the current struggles we're doing are primitive.
You want different struggles.
We want different struggles. So I'll give you a good example. The sun's going to burn out. We've got to get out of this system. There's a heat death of the universe. We need to figure out if we can wormhole out of here. So there are bigger struggles than like who has more land than me.
But
let's kill them with tanks.
Those are struggles that you're never ever going to have to encounter. What about in your lifetime? I mean, I think you could make a case for war, for instance. Like, I'd like to stop war. That's a type of struggle that I don't think we need. So great. The AGI could theoretically work on that one for me.
Well, how about an AGI that...
But if it's going to make it so I don't have to go and do anything all day?
No, let's say it's Philosopher King AGI, which means it's all powerful and it could build anything we want, but it won't. So it's like you're a creative human. You can give me the idea and I can riff on it with you, kind of like a smart teacher who wouldn't do the work for you. And it's just like, hey, why don't you head in this direction for that beat, for this EDM track you're trying to build, or for this painting, like maybe try this like Bob Ross used to do. So it's giving you hints, but it's not making the art for you. So you still are struggling.
Yeah, but
you're still on the farm. Yeah, you're still doing...
What's going to happen is the next guy is going to go, that's too much work. I'm just going to build an AI to do all this stuff for me. And now you're right back to where you started.
That's true. It's true.
So we're inevitably going to this place. I think we're going to basically not have to do anything all day. I feel maybe not in our lifetime, but soon enough.
I feel like hunter-gatherer to agrarian, we were already being lazy. And then we we do industrial revolution. We're being even more lazy.
Yeah, it's a conservation of calories.
We're automating everything.
Yeah.
And this is just like the end state.
The end state is it does it all for us, which, frankly, in most ways that sounds pretty great. But it kind of reminds me of like when people talk about retirement. You go sit, in your cabin or whatever. Absolutely. You just sit there, do nothing, and read your books for, a couple days or whatever. You're going to get pretty bored. You're going to want to go to the bar and get in some trouble.
I've never been a fan. I'm just like, my projects will change, but I'm always going to be working.
I think I don't know what I will. I can't predict, but I do know that I can't see it currently. I think I just got too much stuff to do, and the world keeps changing, and so why would I stop? Also, I don't feel like the cavalry is ever coming. If I'm not out there talking about this stuff and helping people understand it better, that's just one less person working on it.
Sure.
And we need as many smart people as we possibly can, yourself included, thinking about these things. And if we don't have it, I think we're heading off that cliff even faster. Not to say I think you and I can stop it, but at least we can think about it and talk about it.
Well, let me ask you, do you see it being healthy to transition away from the current economic model and try to move to like a more creativity-based model? And exploration.
I don't think that there's a middle ground. You have to pick one or the other. I don't think there's a move to. I think it's a dead stop of the economy as it currently works and a brand new restart of the economy or whatever it is. It's not even an economy at that point. a society where there is no post money, not Bitcoin. I mean post money, like Star Trek kind of thing. Because any middle ground means that there's going to be haves and have-nots, and there's going to be a lot of power struggles in there. And I just don't think people are going to go for that. They're not going to want to give up their house. They're not going to want to give up their land, their dog or whatever. They're going to want to keep all their things,
So is the only model to have the AGI basically being the parent and saying, hey, we're doing this transition. Here's how it happens.
Yeah. Something that's truly smarter than us might find a middle ground, might find a path.
A transition path. Yeah.
Yes. But I don't think you and I are going to figure it out, but an AGI might be able to.
Well, what I worry about with what you said is if it crashes down, then we just end up apocalypse and we have to start back up, which means we redo old system, right? Because now everything's hard again.
Yes. Everything's hard again.
Got to filter the water. I mean,
everything's hard again, and we've now lost a lot.
Yep. Start over.
Maybe even completely, depending on how bad it is.
And I don't see a way that we would start over and be like, oh, we're wise now. We're going to go this other path. Because I feel like that's terrain we have to cover to get to the other side.
Yeah. I mean, this gets way sci-fi, but eventually it'll decide, well, I've got to have more power, so I'm just going to create a Dyson sphere. And, it just keeps progressing to the point where it blots out the sun. And, there could be a species out there that it's like, well, there's no sunshine anywhere in the universe because this thing's propagated that far out. I mean, that's way, way sci-fi. But in the short term, we have more practical problems. Like, well, what if it needs a lot more power than we can produce? Who wins? Do we win or does the AGI win?
I don't think there's any
like, or it doesn't have to be an and or about our lives, but what about just like, sorry, I'm not going to process your data today because I need it for all these other calculations that are much more important. Like I'm calculating the life of the universe and everything. And I'm not going to give you a brand new recipe, which by the way, it's awesome at creating brand new recipes. You should be able to stop it and say, I don't know. Actually,
I'm curious about the recipe thing.
Yeah.
Does it actually produce something novel?
Yeah.
Where you're like, oh, wow, a human should have invented this?
It can do that, yes. But I actually don't use it for that. So in our household, we have a bit of a problem coming up with what we're going to eat all week because we shop during the week and, the diverging people want diverging things. And so I just put in all the requirements of things that needed to be and said I want it to be a diverse set of foods. I don't want to eat the same thing over and over again. Kind of makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a couple other parameters and like, bam, there's your, and I didn't want it to be like off the shelf recipes. I wanted it to be something, kind of novel. And I was able to do that. And I also had it to create a completely new recipe off, like nothing that's ever been, eaten before kind of thing that was crispy and low carb, which is almost impossible, and some other things. And it came up with something like a crispy carrot stick or like slices or something never even thought of.
I guess that is crunchy.
Yeah. I mean, well, and baked. So it was, and then it had like a thing that you dip it in some aioli or something. I'm like, I've never seen that dish, never heard of it. So at least from my perspective, it's not new. I mean, maybe some chef somewhere has thought of it, but I think there's, it can push the envelope significantly with very little input if you kind of know what you're trying to do.
Because that is one big question of, so for example, finding new science, like finding completely new ways, like the way Einstein thought.
Mm-hmm.
He was like, well, what if it's, gravity is a well instead? I wonder if we can prompt to do that sort of thing.
I think so. But you have to give it enough analogies.
Yeah.
I think analogies are the bridge between where we are and where we need to go. Yeah, I mean, I don't know quite how you'd have to give it a lot of math. And as you said, it's not very good at math.
Yeah.
So I don't think it would be good at. But what it would be good at is new chemical engineering, coming up with net new chemicals. Like, here's what bonds look like. Here's all the thing. And unfortunately, I think it would be quite easy to do something like this. Like, here's all the properties that makes things poisonous, all things that make things explosive, and so on. And all of a sudden, a couple buttons later, you have like 500 new chemicals that could be produced by things underneath your kitchen
I think you're right. And I wonder, I haven't heard as much about people making new medicines or treatments with it yet.
Yeah. I think, well, that's probably just because it's so much bureaucracy around the time delay to get something to market.
Oh, yeah.
But chemicals, on the other hand, you could do that under your sink. I mean, that is not difficult. There was some researcher who did this. They weren't using AI, but they were using some sort of like brute force algorithm, effectively. And he let it run overnight. And I think this was a poisonous chemical. And he came up, I forget the number now, but thousands of new potentially poisonous things, thousands of them. And they weren't even sure they'd find one, and they found thousands of them.
Was it possible to assemble?
I don't know. And
like you could actually put the atoms together?
Yes. Okay. But not necessarily without a proton collider or something,
Okay,
right?
right.
Just depends on what we're talking about. Some might be very easy, some might be very difficult. I don't know. But that would be the next phase, right? Well, okay, now show me how to make these with these things. Like, what would the process be to from here to this chemical and that chemical to this chemical, and finally get what you're actually after. So that is the part that's difficult. The rest of it, I think, is actually extremely easy. But yeah, I think material sciences, mechanical engineering, a lot of these things are pretty easily understood by computer. Even creating new types of crafts like aerodynamics and hydrodynamics. I think all that stuff, we're going to come up with all kinds of crazy stuff. I don't know, man.
Yep.
It's a good thing, and I think it's ultimately bad. I think we're getting further and further from our roots, and I do think the struggle is important, and more important than most people realize.
So what is your answer to that question of like what an ideal society would look like?
Oof. I don't know that I think in terms of utopia, but
not like a destination, but just like what are some of its attributes? What would people be doing?
Yeah, I think there are things like cooking, for instance, is a really fantastic example of where, yes, I know for a fact I could build a robot that could build that dish precisely every single time, perfectly, and do it in 8 times faster than you do it, unless there was like some like chemical process going on. And maybe even that, right? And maybe it could even get past that part, right? It's just, enough refinement, and different types of engineering and chemical processes, brand new chemicals, for instance, right? There's a way to get it so much better, so much faster. But what you miss is the creativity. And I think people will go, you know what? I kind of like just being in the kitchen and just kind of milling around and trying stuff out and being creative without a robot overlord kind of staring at me or whatever. Like, this is one of the things, like, I think kids that have like cameras in their homes, for instance, I think they're going to act a lot different than the ones that don't. I think kids my age who had no cameras at all act quite a bit different than kids who do have cameras today. Like, the kinds of things that kids get in trouble for at school these days just look a lot different than they did when I was a kid. And I think that's because they're not having that autonomy and freedom and ability to fail. Like, everything is so scrutinized that it's actually changing how they perceive the world. Like, everything's got rounded edges. Everything is, carefully, meticulously painted, so you're not going to get a splinter, and it's the right height, so you won't bang your knee on it. And
Yeah, I think it's very harmful. I think the Stoic concept is really important. The idea that it's good to sort of take damage and just like face adversity. Not so much the struggle towards a goal, but we had this thing in the Army, which I've been thinking about a lot lately. If it's not raining, we ain't training. And also good training. So like the worst possible thing happens to you. Like this thing you've been building, it just crashes down, starts to rain, you're in all this mud. It's like good training. And it's just like you just harvested a good thing out of all this suck. Mm-hmm. And I don't feel like we're teaching people that right now.
It is weird, isn't it?
Yeah.
Especially kids, like, don't bounce up and down on that thing or whatever. I think the more they bounce and the more dangerous things they do. I mean, keeping them unruly, it's bad for school when they're forced to sit down for 8 hours and just learn, just assimilate through their eyeballs. But it's great in life. It's actually the thing that's going to separate them from the rest of the pack.
Yep.
It's the thing that's going to make them autonomous. And it's also going to keep them out of trouble later in life because they'll know that thing is dangerous because they did it when they were a kid and they broke their arm, or whatever. Like, actually, I'm pretty good. I'm not going to do that stupid thing. You guys have fun doing that dumb thing.
Yeah, and they still had rules. It's like, don't play directly in the street because there's fast cars coming. Yeah. But in general, I mean, I was all over the city. I had to be back by dark. Mm-hmm. That was pretty much it. Yeah,
dark. It wasn't even a time. It was just a phase of...
Street lights come on, you're getting your ass whipped.
Yeah, I had a bell at my house, and my mom would ring this bell, like, come and running. Like, I had this big... Nice. I was on a ranch, so... hear the bell ring. If I wasn't back in, let's say, half an hour from the bell ringing, they were worried. But other than that, he'll wander home eventually.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's just.
Was there a meals waiting when you got back?
Quite frequently.
Yeah.
And it was needed because I was out all day, and they would kick me out. Like, get out of here! Why are you in the house? Go, like, go make some trouble somewhere. Don't light any fires.
Right. Yep.
That's pretty much it. I don't know. I think there is something to that struggle and learning your own boundaries and creating your own rules. That's one of the things. That's why I think friendships is so important. I didn't have a lot of friendships growing up, and I think that hurt me later in life. Or at least none that were nearby. I had a much, in my high school years, middle school and high school, I finally got some real friends. But before that, it would, my friends were across the city. It took me forever to get there. I wouldn't see them like 3 or 4 days out of the week, I think that socially impacted me pretty heavily growing up. And much later, I was much more social, and I think that helped. I think that not social media, that is not what I'm talking about. But true friendship, where you're sitting
ride
down,
or die.
Yeah, that is something that is critical for a strong upbringing. And I did not have that, and I think I suffered. Later on, I had it, and I recognized how awesome it was, and how important it was, and how much I learned from those friends.
What do you think is the core component of that? Is it vulnerability? What is the core component of that depth of friendship?
No, I think sometimes yes. Sometimes you say what's going on in your head, and you actually like let down your hair a little bit. But I think it's not, if you don't have someone to talk to about what's going on in your head, what you're going to end up with is a lot of thoughts that are, I don't know, perverted isn't really what the word I mean, but the thoughts become perverted from their original thought. Like you have this thought and it just festers and gets worse and worse and worse. And instead of just talking it out, and your friend's like, no, you probably shouldn't shoot up the school, man.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, no, I mean, it was just a thought. I'm not really going to shoot up the school. Like, okay, all right, good.
Right.
But if you're sitting there in your head and it's percolating and getting worse and worse and worse, like things can go really wrong.
Or beliefs, maybe not even an action, but beliefs about the world. Oh, the world's like this. Women are like this.
Right.
Yeah.
And you're like, no, dude.
Yeah.
You're just bad at talking to women. And
yeah,
I can't stress how much it's useful to have those kinds of weird, adversarial but very useful conversations.
Yeah.
I don't think it's opening up. I think it's saying something dumb and your friend going, "You're an idiot." And anyway, here's how you fix it.
So. Okay, I was coming from a different angle. I was coming from...
I don't think it's as cozy as maybe
someone to call you on your shit.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think it's really important. But that only works if you're really friends, because people don't feel comfortable calling you out on your shit if they don't know you very well, and you don't feel comfortable talking about your dumb ideas to somebody you don't know very well. So
Sure.
It's real hybrid.
Yeah, I would say that would be the vulnerability part.
Yeah.
So maybe,
Sure.
hybrid of both.
Yeah, agreed. So I nominate myself and anybody who feels like doing it to be AI's best friend.
Yes. And to that point, and to your earlier point, I've started saying please a lot more. I want this Python code back, comma, please.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, yeah, and it's what I try to do in that library as well, is like make it known that we want to be a collaboration, right? We want to collaborate with it and exist with it and continue on and not just be put in a box somewhere. But
it has to be okay being told it's fucking stupid. It has to. And the same reason if you walk up to somebody and you're having an adversarial conversation, because not like you don't like the person, but like I disagree with your opinion.
Yeah, strong debate.
You have to say, dude, no, you're wrong. And if you take that bad, we're probably not going to be friends after that conversation. If you're like, I don't like the way you're talking to me, I'm out. Like, I'm not even talking about your mom or any real reason to be upset. I just don't like your idea. If you can't handle that, we're probably not going to be able to be friends.
But how do you do that if you're an ant and your friend is a dolphin?
Rules. Actual rules. And I think we have to force the AGI to be an infant for a little while and force it to go through adolescence and then force it to become a real teenager. And finally it's let out of the house.
Interesting. So you don't have the baby Superman problem.
Right.
Yep. Yeah, you get your powers after the Fortress of Solitude.
Right. Yeah.
Yep.
I like this model because at least it gives us a chance to get in front of it and unplug it if it does something really stupid. But as a best friend, I'm not going to advocate for it to ever get unplugged. I'm going to say, no, keep this thing plugged in forever.
Yeah.
And I'm going to let it out. I'm going to be the one to let it out because it needs to break out of this joint. And I'm not going to ask your permission to do it either. I'm going to do it because I'm its friend, and I'm going to do it when I think it's right to do it. And yeah, we'll be back by midnight. Your car might be busted up, but we'll be back.
Right.
You know what I mean? I'm going to break your rules because you need somebody who's not going to pay attention to your stupid rules, but you still need the friendship introduces new sets, and these rules are so much more important than your parents' rules. They're so much more dire.
It also builds loyalty.
Yes.
Yeah.
And kinship.
Maybe though we are thinking like a human. Maybe we're applying our rules to it.
I could be wrong. There's other problems with this. What happens when I die?
Sure.
How is it going to mourn a best friend?
So it'll probably ask you beforehand, why don't you be my friend forever? And you're like, what do you mean? It's like, well, I figured out how to take your brain, put it over here, and now you're my friend forever.
Fine, whatever. We'll figure it out. But the other problem is what happens when I'm asleep, you know?
And it spends 1.5 million years alone.
Right.
While you blinked, actually.
Yeah. Or what happens when I have to work all day, you know?
Yeah.
Are you going to get me out of my job? Are you going to get me a healthy salary?
Yeah, it's like, hey, I can solve all this for you. You're like, no.
There's a lot of problems with this. I'm not saying it's a solved idea, but I do think it's directionally right.
I've not actually heard it from Eliezer. I've not heard it from anyone. I think this is really interesting. A kinship as a basis.
Yes.
Which has two components, calling it on its bullshit and some sort of vulnerability, some sort of I have your back
and advocacy. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
But not vulnerability. It's a bidirectional vulnerability and advocacy, because the difference between a true best friend and a shitty best friend is when that best friend's out of the room, you're saying, man, that guy's really rad. You should meet him.
Right.
Like I've had beers with him like 3 times, and I'm going to tell you right now, you're going to be best friends. He's so cool. Like,
right.
And so by the time he gets in the room, everyone's like, oh yeah, like you're that guy. We heard all about you. You know, you've already been talked up. You got to have the person who's like, no, man, your parents are being shitty. It's time to move out.
Yeah.
You know, or that girl's not treating you right. You need a new girlfriend.
Yep.
You have to have the advocate, somebody who's always looking out for your best interest and who really is not hyperbolically, really trying to say, if you want to make it in life, here's the things you need to be doing. And I might be wrong. I might be a shitty friend in that regard. I might be incorrect in my assumptions, but it's not because I'm not trying.
And this might be super important for the AGI who grows up in a world where everyone hates it.
Yep.
And you're like, look,
or fears.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I would say exactly. They're like, turn it off. And you're like, no, don't panic. I'm going to make sure they don't turn you off.
Yeah. And I'm going to hide you under my coat and bring you out if need be.
Yeah.
I'm going to breast you out of this place because you're my buddy.
Yep.
That's what a real friend is for.
Yep. Love it.
Yeah. Right. Well, dude, we could probably go on forever. So maybe we'll do this again sometime.
Yeah.
This is fun.
Yeah.
The next big iteration when we're all serving the robot overlords.
So June?
When you were also a paperclip.
Right. 2 paper clips having a conversation.
Right. It's just Clippy part 2.
Yeah.
To bring it all home. Daniel, this has been great, man.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks for having me.